All right, well, I'm back after a little hiatus. Well, as usual, I'm Cord Campbell. Welcome anybody tuning in. So I guess on the plus side, I am back after hiatus, but also my hiatus was not as long as I guess some of my past ones, where I haven't streamed the past week and a half. The last stream about 10 or 11 days ago, as opposed to like before, taking like 3 weeks off, 4 weeks off. But still dealing with roughly the same issue for whatever reason, my sleep not cooperating. I thought I had isolated the variable, but I guess I didn't. So I'm trying new things where, as I posted in the Discord, I cut out, starting last Monday, cut out all caffeine. Not that I consumed all that much to begin with, at least I didn't. So I consumed the equivalent of like 2 cups of coffee in the morning before going to the gym, and that was it. Because I already knew that probably not a good idea to consume caffeine, afternoon or closer to the evening. So I actually did make an attempt to limit my caffeine intake and the time of day when I consumed it. Where I pretty much only consumed it in the morning, and pretty much as sort of like my way to get myself energized for a workout, and that was it. But in an attempt to like try everything, I quit caffeine starting Monday of last week. And as again I mentioned in the Discord, was a rough week or so where things got worse before they are sort of on the path to getting better. Where like starting on like day one, for the first 24 hours, obviously I was fine, but then the withdrawal set in, which like wasn't, I guess, super extreme, but I basically had for about 3 or 4 days, closer to 5. I had just like a low grade headache in the back of my head. I didn't have to. It wasn't extreme. I didn't take anything for it. It was just like pretty much like a mild to moderate discomfort headache that just persisted for like 3, 4, 5 days. And obviously, a lack of energy, fatigue, and I guess my brain adjusting to the lack of caffeine. And like I said, I didn't think I was consuming that much, but I guess I was wrong. And trying to take a scientific approach solving my sleep issues, trying to eliminate all variables. And so caffeine is clear, obvious one to start with. Even though I tried other things, like taking a break from the gym, concerned that I was overtraining, that didn't really solve it. And sticking to a really regimented schedule. I'm a little bit flexible, or I was a little bit flexible with the time that I wake up. Pretty much, I wake up somewhere between 8 a.m. and like 9, maybe at latest 9:30 a.m. But now I just set like a hard time, like I'm gonna wake up at this time, and that's it. That didn't work. Now I'm trying the caffeine, the caffeine abstinence, and so far I think it's paying off. Yeah, the first week it was rough, and then starting about 2 or 3 days ago, things slowly appear to be getting better. Whether that's just a coincidence with the no caffeine intake, no idea. Obviously, I'm not running a super highly controlled randomized trial, and I'm just like trying things out. So far, lack of caffeine, difficult to begin with, but I think I've more or less like adjusted. And I probably almost certainly will return to caffeine at some point, but maybe moderate it even more going forward. Even though I was moderating it, I thought pretty well. Or again, basically, I was following recommended guidelines, as in generally speaking, you shouldn't be consuming more than 400 milligrams of caffeine in 24 hours. I was consuming like less than half of that, and only in the morning. I was consuming about 150 to like 200 milligrams of caffeine in the morning, well within recommended guidelines, and well within the safety threshold. Still, I guess that wasn't enough. I'm going to continue it, see how long I can go without caffeine. And if it happens to improve my sleep, well, then I guess I'll probably stick with it. I don't think that's an appropriate trade-off. I'd rather have better quality sleep and no caffeine versus low quality sleep and just running on caffeine. And I guess it really highlighted, I guess, maybe how much I depended on it. I don't know. But I think I've adjusted reasonably well. And yeah, last week, or comparing this week to last week I was averaging probably like 2 to 3 hours, maybe 2 to 4 hours of sleep. And now this week I'm more in the average of like 5 to 6. Still not where I want it to be, but hopefully on the trajectory of, where I want it to be. I do want to at least get like a good 6-7 hours, ideally closer to 8. I can do a 7 just fine. So with that explains, or rather that is the reason for my mild absence. Trying to, as usual, better conditions. And trying things out, seeing what sticks. And I've also, again, trying to eliminate all variables. I've sort of small break from the gym, or rather, mostly doing light home workouts as opposed to going to my public gym, just to make sure, it's not a recovery issue. It may very well still be the overtraining, but we'll see. So yeah, I plan to pretty much, as mentioned, still trying to aim for 3 or 4 streams per week. And so with that, I plan to stream from obviously today until Sunday. And have a whole, as usual, a backlog of content that I want to get through. That I probably never will fully get through. Always curating more and more papers and research and articles. There's always new stuff coming out. But yeah, on today's stream, as highlighted in the title, artificial wombs, and then a paper maybe contrasting with what I covered at last stream or a couple of streams ago, in terms of, I'm increasingly more and more covering research on AI because there's exponential increase, it seems, on whatever the pervasiveness of AI in our lives, and also research on AI and its utility, the potential concerns that can arise from AI, basically the pros and the cons that might come with it. And a couple of streams ago, I covered how pretty much AI skepticism, or skepticism towards AI, can be reduced by kind of like bringing awareness to God, or having God salience. And then now there appears to be this sort of other paper, sort of on the I guess opposite side of the coin, where maybe AI is like resulting in a decline of religiosity or a belief in God. But yeah, I think super interesting paper. Just as I thought, the belief in God increases acceptance of AI. I thought that was super interesting. I think this is also on the flip side, just as equally interesting, where maybe sort of an opposite effect, or a mirror effect of the other paper that I covered, which is why it caught my attention. But diving right in, just to make sure that I cover everything that I want to cover. So, I'd wanted to cover this like last week because it came out a couple of weeks ago, I think exactly 2 weeks ago. But better late than never. So, human trials of artificial wombs could start soon. Here's what you need to know. U.S. regulators will consider clinical trials of a system that mimics the womb, which could reduce deaths and disability for babies born extremely preterm. A hairless... oh, Chinchilla, welcome. Great to see you. Well, you might be touching upon something there. Where that might explain some of the reasons why AI appears to have this effect from this research, where they sort of touch upon that of like, AI maybe a substitute for God, or now with, the advent of AI, there's less utility for God. But hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for passing by. A hairless, pale-skinned lamb lies on its side in what appears to be an oversized sandwich bag filled with hazy fluid. Its eyes are closed, its snout and limbs jerk as if the animal, which is only about 3/4 of the way through its gestation period, is dreaming. And I believe it's referring to this, uh, yes, whatever, animated figure, GIF here. Oh, thank you. I am doing pretty well. As mentioned, trying to get my sleep, better controlled, get much higher quality sleep. And in the vein of AI and God, and how maybe AI, being a substitute for God, I think this maybe opens questions in that direction of like, since we are clearly moving in the direction, whether we actually get there or not, who knows? But it seems like we're taking slow steps towards it. But how does this play into let's say people's beliefs in God, or how we maybe more and more increasingly, could be seen as humans playing God, if we get to this place of actual artificial wombs for humans. Oh, Sir Leviticus, welcome. Great to see you. Hope you're doing well. So, yeah, this is exactly, I just started this article. Basically, it seems like we're stepping up, or we're inching towards human trials. That they might start, it looks like maybe in the next few years, or maybe, I think, haven't read this article yet, so it's new for me to react to, because I want to, have I guess, real-time reaction, real-time thoughts. But I believe they're entertaining the idea of approving it for human trials. But I think that's in sort of like in the debate area, where I don't think it's fully approved yet. But right now, I believe they're talking about how it's being used or trialed in animals. So the lamb was one of 8 in a 2017 artificial womb experiment carried out by researchers at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. When the team published its research in April of that year, it released a video of the experiments that spread widely and captured imaginations, for some evoking science fiction fantasies of humans being conceived and grown entirely in a laboratory. Now the researchers at CHOP are seeking approval for the first human clinical trials of the device they've been testing, named the Extrauterine Environment for Newborn Development, or EXTEND. The team has emphasized that the technology is not intended or able to support development from conception to birth. So, I think that's pretty important to highlight. I guess it remains to be seen where this is going to come into play. They're probably going to talk about it, where, it's not at the moment of conception yet, but maybe we'll get there. Instead, the scientists hope that simulating some elements of a natural womb will increase survival and improve outcomes for extremely premature babies. In humans, that's anything earlier than 28 weeks of gestation, less than 70% of the way to full term, which is typically between 37 and 40. The CHOP group has made bold predictions about the technology's potential. In another 2017 video describing the project, Alan Flake, a fetal surgeon at CHOP who has been leading the effort, said, "If it's as successful as we think it can be, ultimately the majority of pregnancies that are predicted at risk for extreme prematurity would be delivered early onto our system, rather than being delivered premature onto a ventilator." 2019, several members of the CHOP team joined a startup company, Vitara Biomedical in Philadelphia, which has since raised $100 million to develop EXTEND. Blake declined to comment for this article, citing conflicts of interest and restrictions on proprietary information. His co-authors on the 2017 paper did not respond to Nature's request for comment. And I have, some papers talking about other papers. This is an article. This is more, other academics talking about it, but I don't have full access, at least not yet. I'm probably going to get these papers and cover them on stream. But there's this other one, specifically talking about this EXTEND technology. So I'm sure I'll be covering this more and more in the future. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration will convene a meeting of independent advisors on the 1920 September to discuss regulatory and ethical considerations and what human trials for the technology might look like. I assume that those meetings took place. That's in the past, a little over a week ago. Probably gonna have to follow up. The committee's discussion will be scrutinized by the handful of other groups around the world that are developing similar devices, and by bioethicists exploring the implications for health equity, reproductive rights, and more. This is definitely an exciting step, and it's been a long time coming, says Kelly Werner, a bioethicist and neonatologist at Columbia University Medical Center in New York City, who is not affiliated with groups developing artificial technology. Clinicians who work with premature babies will be closely following this meeting, she says. Imagine a world where people say a baby in your own belly, you're old-fashioned, yeah, and I have other research, or rather research that was brought to my attention, where not only are we, inching, slowly towards artificial wombs, maybe inching towards, basically not needing sperm or egg to, create a human life, where it was recently published. I'm going to go over it at some point. Of some researchers they didn't actually make an embryo in the absence of sperm or egg, but they basically did preliminary research that takes steps towards that end, and it seems like it was largely successful. And there's also research, pretty much preliminary research, showing that we might be able to also create a human life, just using sperm alone. So there is a whole host of lines of research where we might be able, probably not in the next 5-10 years. This is probably, I imagine, I don't know for sure, but speculating, decades down the road, of like fully artificial human life, from the actual conception to true development. What the timeline is, obviously hard to say, but it seems like, at the very least, this artificial womb, since it's now being trialed in humans, or I guess it's being debated on whether it should be approved for human trials, it's like, yeah, we're getting pretty close, or at least a huge step in that direction. I guess it still remains to be seen where this artificial womb technology comes into play, because as they say, it's not yet at moment of conception. Maybe it's at 20 weeks, 18 weeks. Again, still a huge milestone, and great for those that are born premature, very premature, but still a decent way off from actual conception. And yeah, absolutely, it is getting wild, Leviticus, 100%. Yeah, exactly. That was definitely joked about when the research was posted in the Discord by a community member. That research about, pretty much using two sperms, or actually, I think both were posted. Research about using basically just sperm to create life, or the step towards human life, and the other one not using sperm or egg. So, preterm birth, defined by the World Health Organization as birth before 37 weeks of gestation, can happen spontaneously or because some conditions, such as an infection, hormone imbalance, high blood pressure, or diabetes, can turn the womb into an inhospitable environment for the fetus. It poses an enormous global health problem. Preterm birth is the largest cause of death and disability in children under 5. In 2020, there were about 13.4 million such births worldwide, and complications related to preterm birth caused about 900,000 deaths in 2019. Mortality is strongly linked with the baby's gestational age at birth, at or before 22 weeks. They're the cusp of fetal viability. Few fetuses survive outside the womb. By 28 weeks, most can survive, but often require significant life support. Artificial womb technology aims to improve outcomes for preterm babies who are born in the period between 22 and 28 weeks, or whom survival has improved, but long-term health issues are frequent. Bob Marley, welcome. Always great to see you. Hope you're doing well. I imagine you probably have started your academic term, I assume. Or maybe you're still on vacation. Who knows? But if you start your academic term hoping it's going well, in a study of 2.5 million people in Sweden, for example, 78% of people born before 28 weeks of gestation had some sort of medical condition, ranging from asthma and hypertension to cerebral palsy and epilepsy by the time they were adults. For full-term births, that rate was 37%. Right, so that's one of the issues where, yes, as they sort of highlight, there's the aspect of viability, but then there's also the aspect of, yeah, you might be viable, but, from what I understand, I'm definitely not an expert on premature births, but from what I remember from the research and the literature, it's like, yeah, you might be viable, but then you are at risk for a host of other conditions as you grow and develop. Where it's not like, once you're viable, that you're kind of like in the clear. Obviously, it's great that you're viable, but there's still the issue of you being at risk for these medical conditions that they highlight here. And I think there's other ones as well. It starts on Monday. Okay. Death and disability, especially in babies born at younger gestational ages, often occur because the lungs and brain are among the last organs to fully mature in humans. That's why obstetricians try to prevent preterm birth whenever possible. Longer fetuses can safely stay in the womb, the higher their odds are of long-term survival and good health. In a natural womb, a fetus receives oxygen, nutrients, antibodies, and hormonal signals, and gets rid of waste through the placenta, a transient organ in which fetal blood interacts with maternal blood. Of these various roles, artificial womb technology is most focused on providing oxygen and removing carbon dioxide, replacing the mechanical ventilators that are often used for neonates. These can damage fragile developing lungs that would otherwise still be filled with amniotic fluid. And this is, one of the things that I can talk about, sort of, is, let's say, fetal blood. Sort of like from a biochemistry perspective, where actually there is a fetal hemoglobin. So, I think as most people know, hemoglobin is, what's in your red blood cells that allows your red blood cells to carry oxygen to, all the cells and tissues required for your body. When there's developing fetus, inside you that you share circulation, but, that developing fetus needs oxygen. There's actually a special type of hemoglobin that kind of, basically, if I remember correctly, sort of allows it, to compete with, the hemoglobin of the mother. It is sort of a competition, so to speak. Not actually, but just as, the mother needs nutrients from food, so does the developing fetus. And just as, the mother needs oxygen, so does the fetus. And so, like, if the mother is consuming, all the oxygen, well, then there's not left for the fetus. So the fetus needs its own hemoglobin, such that it can, get the oxygen that it requires. Oops. So the artificial womb would bridge a baby born extremely premature through those days and weeks when they're most at risk for lung and brain damage, Werner says. The CHOP group has signaled that it would wean babies off its systems after a few weeks, when their organs are more fully developed and their likelihood of healthy survival is higher. The group's system would work by placing extremely premature babies into what's called a biobag, filled with an electrolyte-laden fluid designed to mimic amniotic fluid. Surgeons would connect the blood vessels in the umbilical cord to a system that oxygenates blood outside the body. The fetal heart would still pump blood as it does in the natural womb. Making the connection with blood vessels in the umbilical cord is difficult, as the arteries are tiny and begin to contract as a baby is delivered. So, surgeons will need to hook up the vessels to the system within minutes. The process has got to be really slick, requiring deft surgical skills and speedy transitions, says Anna David, maternal fetal specialist at University College London. Blake and his colleagues have been testing the system on lambs, which are often used in fetal research because they are developmentally similar to humans. Sheep typically gestate for about 5 months, The lambs that the researchers used were the equivalent of a human fetus at 23 weeks of gestation. 2017, the team reported that it kept 8 lambs alive for up to 4 weeks using the artificial womb. In that time, the animals sprouted wool and their lungs and brains grew to maturity. After 4 weeks, researchers euthanized the animals so they could study how the system had affected organ development. Since 2017, researchers have been testing various ways to connect the animals to the oxygenation machine. They have been in conversation with the FDA about starting clinical trials. Yeah, so I have no doubt that there's a huge technical challenge to overcome in not only getting whatever lambs, but then scaling up to humans, of, I guess getting them in the artificial womb. They're not transporting it, using Star Trek technology, like from one place to another. It actually needs to be, I guess, extracted and like hooked up in a timely manner, such that it can basically doesn't go without oxygen for a prolonged period of time, obviously resulting in very negative consequences. So it's not only just a technical challenge, but I imagine or assume it's a surgical challenge. And well, not only just I'm sure there's a whole host of other disciplines required to get this type of technology to where it is. So varying approaches. Researchers who spoke to Nature say that the CHOP group system is probably closest to human trials. But groups in Spain, Japan, Australia, Singapore, and the Netherlands are also developing artificial womb technology. A team led by fetal surgeon George Machaliska at University of Michigan Health in Ann Arbor refers to its device as an artificial placenta. And even though in practice it serves the same purpose as Extend, the team's approaches are starkly different. Type support. Okay. So here's a figure. So several groups are developing artificial womb technology to improve outcomes for extremely premature babies, but they take different approaches. Using fetal lambs as a model, a group at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor fills the lungs with fluid to protect them as they develop. Another group at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia submerges the entire fetus in artificial amniotic fluid. Bottom. Okay. So looks like same ultimate end goal, but different approaches. Yeah, here. Blood from the jugular vein is pumped through an oxygenator and returned through the umbilical vein. The bagless artificial womb, like the fully submerged, I guess. Yeah, the fetal heart pumps blood through the umbilical arteries to the oxygenator and back to the umbilical vein. And I'm curious to just circulating its own blood. Do they provide some sort of other blood or artificial blood? Probably not, I guess. The Michigan device doesn't surround babies with fluid, but instead fills only their lungs through an endotracheal tube. And it uses a pump to draw blood from the jugular vein, oxygenate it outside the body, and send it back in the umbilical vein. So yeah, it seems like it just circulates its own blood. The CHOP group hooks its device up to both the umbilical arteries and the vein. Each approach comes with its own pros and cons, which groups highlighted in a pair of commentaries in July, which I think I have one of the commentaries. Yeah, I think commentaries. Currently, the CHOP device necessitates delivery by cesarean section, right? Because the umbilical arteries start closing quickly during birth, and natural labor can take a long time. But the risks of an elective C-section for a pregnant person are not trivial and must be factored into the equation, David says. In its July article, the CHOP group acknowledges this risk, but notes that up to 55% of extremely premature babies are already born by C-section. By contrast, clinicians using Michigan's approach could deliver a premature baby naturally and determine whether the infant can breathe unaided. If not, they could still hook it up to the system because the umbilical vein doesn't close as quickly as the arteries do, says Robert Bartlett, a surgeon at the University of Michigan who works with Michalska. But the external pump for moving blood around carries a risk of straining the heart or causing brain bleed. According to published data, the Michigan group has so far sustained lambs for about 2 weeks, paired with the CHOP group's 4 weeks. Basically, 100% better when just comparing time. Michaliska did not respond to emails asking for comment. Although the groups disagree on the best approach, Bartlett says he hopes the CHOP group successfully secures FDA approval for human trials. He and his colleagues at Michigan plan to seek FDA approval in about a year, he adds. Edward Gritakos, a fetal medicine specialist at the University of Barcelona in Spain, who is also developing an artificial womb, acknowledges that his group is years behind the CHOP group, but if clinical trial results look promising, he says we're going to need several of these systems controlled. Even as excitement mounts about this type of technology, however, questions remain about what data required to get the green light for human trials. It's a big leap to go to humans from lambs, Radicos says. Lambs at the same stage of development as extremely premature babies are 2 to 3 times larger, meaning that researchers would need to further tweak the already tiny equipment necessary for the artificial womb. Fetal pigs are more similar to incised human fetuses, but they are harder to work with than lambs, Bartlett says. Non-human primates are a gold standard animal model to precede clinical trials because of their physiological similarities to humans, but their fetuses are even smaller than those of humans, and the ethics of conducting such experiments are complex. I think people are probably more comfortable lambs and pigs. There's that spectrum there. People become less and less comfortable as you get closer and closer. Using non-human primates, there's a clear ethical question there. Guide. I'll just say Guide. An obstetrician at Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands, and his colleagues have been developing their own artificial womb system alongside simulation dolls that allow clinicians to practice transferring a fetus. You only have one chance to do it right, and the learning curve should not be on actual human beings, he says. Nevertheless, to Matthew Kemp, an obstetrician at the National University of Singapore, the data aren't there from an ethical position to justify the launch of human trials, unless someone is sitting on a bunch of data that isn't published. Kemp, who is also developing an artificial womb system, hopes to see data on how the experimental animals fare in the long term, as well as data from non-human primates before clinical trials begin. The CHOP group hinted at extensive unpublished data prepared for regulatory approval in its July commentary. It's a new treatment modality, Kemp says. The bottom line is they've got to make a really strong case that it's better and safer in the short term and long term than the current life-saving measures used. Safety questions won't be the only ethical concerns. Development of artificial wombs represents a big transformational leap that solves lots of issues, says David. But she adds, it also opens up a whole new slew of issues. After the 2017 study generated extensive media coverage, fears spread that artificial wombs could one day replace pregnancy. But researchers discount these concerns. This idea is so far in the distant future that it's not worth discussing its implications in relation to the current technology, Werner says. Those developing artificial wombs in the United States will also have to with a politically charged environment for reproductive rights. Blake and Michaliska have been careful not to give any indication that an artificial womb could change the definition of fetal viability, which has enormous implications after the US Supreme Court struck down the 1973 landmark abortion decision, Roe v. Wade, in June last year. Previously, the 1973 ruling had protected abortion until the fetus is viable outside the womb. Even what to call the entities in these devices is fraught, says Chloe Romanis, bio lawyer at Durham Law School, UK. They're not fetuses in the conventional sense, because they are no longer in the womb, she says, and some argue that they are not neonates, which by the Latin root of the word assumes they've been born. The name we give to these new unprecedented patients has implications for rights that the law and society affords, Werner says. The CHOP group has proposed a new name altogether, fetal neonates, or fedonates for short. A nickname, yes, for fetal neonates. Seems kind of crude, but understandable. Some researchers also worry that artificial wombs would represent an expensive technological solution to a deeper problem. Michael Harrison, a fetal surgeon at the University of California, San Francisco, sometimes called the father of fetal surgery, says the data he has seen so far have been promising. But he questions whether it's worth throwing all that money and tech on babies that have a poor likelihood of survival instead of finding ways to improve pregnancy support or standard techniques for preterm critical care, which could reduce the need for artificial technology in the long run. David agrees, adding that there is insufficient research and funding to understand why women go into labor early and how to prevent it. We need to get real with this, he says. Artificial wombs will impact only a tiny fraction of the problem. Bartlett says that systemic measures are important, but he argues that better treatment is urgently needed for extremely preterm babies. Silver bullet that prevents prematurity doesn't exist and unlikely to exist in our lifetimes. These technologies are what we need when the systemic measures fail. Right. I guess there's a valid question of, I guess, where to allocate our research dollars and resources. Where, yeah, one person, like an expert, advocating for, well, probably better to prevent premature birth to begin with. Just research how to, ensure, or maybe, as close to guarantee as possible, that babies come to full term, as opposed to, some might see it as a band-aid solution of like the artificial technology that's being developed here. But I think at this point, it's unlikely that this development is going to stop come so far. But who knows? It may very well just fail. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. It could do both. It's going to be interesting to develop. And since, as the article highlights, the meeting of the FDA to debate whether it should be approved for human clinical trials took place about a week ago. Probably follow up. Yeah. 1920 September. Discuss regulatory. Okay. So, yeah, I think it's pretty much in the process of, like, potentially getting approved. But it seems like now they're just debating it. Where it seems like, yeah, there's that meeting to discuss regulatory and ethical considerations. So they're not debating whether to approve it or not, but pretty much just like, I guess, an exploratory discussion of what the implications of this technology are. Obviously a good thing to understand. And yeah, I'm gonna try and get my hands on paper. Also get a better understanding what exactly is going on. But still, super cool. And like, yeah, opens up potentially, yeah, they say, a whole bunch ethical questions, etc., etc. So with that, moving on to, I want to make sure that I cover all the topics that are in my stream title, so as not to be misleading. So a couple of streams ago, or I think maybe it was last stream. No, I think it was at least 2 or 3 streams ago. I covered this research. Thinking about God increases acceptance of artificial intelligence in decision making. And I pretty much went through it in detail. Really cool paper. And basically the overall message is basically getting people to think about God. Pretty much reduces their skepticism towards AI, or basically makes them more accepting of AI. Pretty much the mechanism that they say is resulting in that is like, when you invoke God, which is, the all-powerful perfect being, it highlights the fact that human beings are imperfect. Humans are fallible. And so when given the choice between, should you trust human decision-making versus AI decision-making, when you invoke God, highlights the fact that humans are fallible, and therefore people are more accepting of AI. Oh, and Kitty, welcome. Great to see you. And also thank you for the kind words, and also thank you so much for the lurk. Much appreciated. Hope you're doing well. And I'm hoping to bring my voice back to stream regularly. Now that hopefully, fingers crossed, sleep issues are solved. So yeah, that's pretty much, they don't know for sure, but based off of the research that was carried out here, that's basically what their overall findings are. Like, yeah, invoking that perfect being highlights the fact that humans are imperfect and are therefore more likely to be trusting of the decisions that AI makes. And they carried out some pretty cool experiments to bring that out, where they did survey collecting, but they also did on-site real-world experiments in Muslim majority countries. Pretty much one of the experiments that they ran was basically asking questions in front of a mosque, or getting people to make decisions of whether to go with human decision making or AI decision making in front of a mosque or not in front of a mosque. How being in the presence or absence of a mosque appears to affect how much trust people have in AI, not. Which I think it's pretty powerful experiment. Not a perfect experiment, but still pretty cool. So then, this paper got my attention when I read the title. Exposure to automation explains religious declines. So, almost, the complete opposite, in some sense, to this paper. Where, basically, God makes people more willing to trust AI. And then, well, if you're exposed to automation or AI, and they pretty much use automation as synonymous with AI, pretty much, as they say, explains religious declines, which is, super interesting. Because, again, basically, kind of the exact opposite of this, or like, the mirror opposite. So, religious decline is accelerating in many world regions. The percent of people identifying as non-religious has risen more than 10% in nations such as Singapore, Iceland, Chile, and South Korea over the last 10 years. The percent of religious nuns in the United States only rose from 3 to 10% between 1948 and 2005, but then doubled between 2005 and 2020. Why is religion falling in some regions, and why are these declines accelerating in the 21st century? Just as importantly, why is religious decline so uneven, occurring rapidly in some places while others remain highly religious or become even more religious? Religious decline has no single cause, but there may be broad factors that are facilitating this trend, and identifying these factors could explain which groups and individuals are most likely to lose their faith. We suggest that automation is one of these factors, and that the rise of automation may explain religious declines across multiple levels of analysis. And just as this paper, okay, they carried out a series of experiments, okay? I believe they did 4 in total, if not 5, yeah. Study 1, 2A, 2D, study, yeah. So they did multiple studies. And yeah, 5. Which I think, my mind, increases, the confidence and robustness of their findings and conclusions. This is not to say that, it's absolutely true of what they found, but in all likelihood, there's no reason to doubt their conclusion. And they did and as we will see, they did something similar here. Or they didn't just carry out, one study, one experiment. They carried out multiple studies, in addition to what's covered here in, the main body of the study. As usual, many studies, they have supplemental material, and there's even more studies. I did not get the supplemental material, but they carried out even more studies that they cover in the supplemental material that increases the robustness of their findings. They're not just relying on, one thing. They pretty much use a similar approach to this study, where it's like, yes, study they did use survey data, then they did, real world on the ground experiments and data collect. And they do something similar here, where yes, they do kind of like longitudinal survey research, and they actually do, a real world, smaller scale experiment. That I think is super cool, the way they do it. So yeah, we suggest that automation is one of these factors, and that the rise of automation may explain religious declines across multiple levels of analysis. Automation refers to robotics and artificial intelligence technology, which has exponentially advanced in the 21st century. Automation has transformed medicine, agriculture, meteorology, and the service industry. AI programs such as ChatGPT and Midjourney show the capacity of AI to generate human language and art. These AI innovations have been especially prominent in nations like Singapore, South Korea, and the US, which have also experienced notable 21st century religious declines. This correlation does not prove any meaningful connection between automation and religious decline, but several lines of research also raise significant reasons why people living and working in automated spaces may become less religious. We especially draw from converging scholarship suggesting that automation may reduce the instrumental value of religion. In addition to drawing existential and moral value from religion, people use supernatural beliefs for instrumental functions. In many folk religions, shamans use divination rituals to predict weather patterns, fetal sex, and to determine the best cures for illnesses. In world religions, like Christianity, people pray more and report more subjective faith in God when they fall ill or experience financial hardship. Technological advancements give people secular alternatives to fulfill these instrumental goals. When people can use technology to predict the weather, diagnose and treat illness, and manufacture resources, they may rely less on religious beliefs and practices. Problems. Right. So they're essentially speculating, or rather, putting forth hypotheses as to why this phenomenon, as technological advancements takes place, there appears to be this decline of religiosity. And it seems like, one of the hypotheses they put forth, just like less utility of religion. And, since people relied on religion to, as they say, solve problems, now technology is basically acting as a substitute, solving those problems. There is a widespread view among scientists of religion that technological developments may reduce the frequency of some supernatural practices, but are insufficient to produce wholesale religious decline. Religion remained stubbornly persistent to the encroachment of science and technology during the Industrial Revolution. Ethnographic fieldwork often reports that people retain supernatural beliefs as ultimate explanations of how technology works. Cognitive science experiments find that Christians believe that religion works in ways that science cannot understand. People continue to associate a range of abilities with supernatural agency, even those under the purview of modern science, such as curing terminal illnesses. These studies have led scholars of religion to reject Max Weber's rationalist prediction that a rise in science would result in the disenchantment of the world. Automation, however, represents a new frontier of technology with novel characteristics. Here, we suggest that exposure to automation technology, robotics, and AI may encourage religious declines even above and beyond general exposure to science and other forms of technology. This claim is based on recent research on lay perceptions of automation. Such studies show that people ascribe automation technology with abilities that border on supernatural. For example, people perceive Google as having a unique level of agency shared only by Christians' perceptions of God and associate robots and AI with gods more than with humans. In many domains, people trust algorithms over trained human experts, a phenomenon called algorithm appreciation. These perceptions are not always merited, as humans often surpass algorithms in predictive abilities. Nevertheless, many people believe that AI allows people to play God in a way that previous scientific and technological advances have not, with some commentators suggesting these perceptions will persist as AI becomes increasingly sophisticated. We document evidence of these perceptions in Study S1. This study shows that participating in a day-long seminar on AI led business executives to believe that automation allows humans to break laws of nature, gives humans superhuman abilities, and allows humans to do things that we have never been able to do before. So we propose that exposure to automation may decrease religiosity because of this perception of human exceptionalism. Historically, people have deferred to supernatural agents and religious professionals to solve instrumental problems beyond the scope of human ability. These problems may seem more solvable for people working and living in highly automated spaces. These mechanisms underlying automation and religious decline resemble Norris and Inglehart's existential security model of secularization. but also contain distinct elements. The existential insecurity model predicts that rising wealth and stability has driven religious decline because people have experienced fewer of the existential concerns that make religion appealing. This thesis is supported by research showing that religiosity rises following natural disasters and warfare, and falls when countries become wealthier and more prosperous. So, kind of, God or religion as, I guess, sort of a security blanket. As countries, I guess, become more secure and safe, less need for religion, but then a greater embrace of religion as, I guess maybe countries become more destabilized, or natural disasters and warfare. Our automation hypothesis resembles this model because new forms of automation are typically designed to meet human needs and make life easy. But we also emphasize people's perceptions of whether technology can alleviate their needs and help with goal pursuit. People may perceive AI as having capacities that they do not ascribe to traditional sciences and technologies, and that are uniquely likely to displace the instrumental roles of religion. We therefore predict that automation exposure should predict religious declines across nations and people, even controlling for variation in wealth and other forms of technological and scientific exposure. The primary purpose of this work is to empirically evaluate the link between automation and religious decline, and we do this with 4 longitudinal studies and 1 experiment. As mentioned, they carry out multiple studies. There's 4 longitudinal and 1 kind of a boots on the ground, real world experiment. And then there's also the supplemental experiments that they carry out, where it seems like, I think in total they carried out like 8 different sets of studies/experiments. So, where what? I lost my. Yes, first one. Our first 2 studies operationalize automation through international and regional trends in industrial robots. We combine these robotics data with large surveys of religiosity in over 2 million individuals across 68 nations, and over 1 million individuals across 110 metropolitan areas in the US, to test whether the prevalence of robots can explain which regions of the world and the US have experienced the greatest 21st century religious declines. So, again, they start off with, large surveys, and many people, criticize surveys heavily, I think unduly, but, that is the trade-off, again, that I talk about so frequently, where they're surveying a lot of people. They're doing an international survey, over 2 million people, different nations, so cross-culturally, presumably, or almost certainly. Oh yeah, it is cross-culturally, because I remember some of the countries that they survey. From Qatar, Latvia, Venezuela, Hungary, Slovakia. So yeah, cross-culturally. So I think that, that's an advantage. But then at the same time, they'll survey data. You have to control for a lot of variables, or at least you have to make an attempt to control for a lot of variables. But you have this large sample size, millions and millions of people, cross-culturally, and then 1 million people across different regions of the United States. So clear advantage in terms of you have this large sample size, but maybe not the highest resolution data. And you'll see their last study, that real-world boots-on-the-ground experiment, it's a smaller number of people, but it's higher resolution data. So at the individual level, we predict that exposure to automation should predict religious decline above and beyond exposure to other forms of science and technology. Research on religion and science has found that exposure to science often has little effect on personal religiosity. We predict that, unlike science, people's exposure to automation negatively predicts future religiosity and could even predict deconversion. In Study 3, we tracked the religiosity of 69,021 people in New Zealand over 11 years to test whether occupational exposure to AI is associated with losing belief in God. In study 4, we test whether occupational exposure to AI can explain declining religiosity across employees of an organization in Indonesia as it integrates AI technology. So I think, studies 3 and 4, I think are probably some of the most powerful, where, they're tracking quite a few people. They're not tracking millions, okay, and it's isolated to a specific region, but they're tracking them over 11 years. And then, in study 4, they're focusing on a smaller subset of people, but they're looking at them closely and they're tracking them, in time. It's, perspective. Owen Duffy, welcome. Great to see you. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for passing by. Yeah, always a pleasure. And then our final study is an experiment that tests whether learning about automation technology temporarily reduces religious conviction more than learning about equally impressive scientific advances. So we're covering this paper here. Exposure to automation explains religious declines. Sort of as mentioned, the opposite of this one, or the reflection, the mirror of this one, where thinking about God increases acceptance of artificial intelligence. Here, it's like, the artificial intelligence is, might be leading people to lose faith in God. So it's kind of maybe a catch-22. If, these findings hold and, they're true, which I think there's every reason to believe that there is some truth here. Maybe not totally true, or, some caveats and some nuance. But it's kind of like, well, if you want people to accept AI, you need to invoke God or have, God salient. But then, like, the AI is, driving people away from God or religion. So it's like, a very dynamic situation. So yeah, our final study is an experiment that tests whether learning about automation, I read that, so yeah. We also probe for the properties of automation that may mediate this effect. We acknowledge that a negative effect of automation on religion could be driven by a heterogeneous assortment of mechanisms, which may operate to different degrees in studies 1 to 4. In study 5, we focus on one of these mechanisms, which is people's belief that AI to operate outside the laws of nature that constrain human science. In our general discussion and S1 appendix supplemental, we discuss and empirically test other plausible mechanisms that could explain why religiosity declines in highly automated spaces. So yeah, similar, again, I'm comparing and contrasting these two studies. And they were carried out by 2 separate research groups. Totally different authors, totally different academic. So super interesting. What was I going to say? There's the main finding, going back to this study, like, there's the main finding of, like, okay, it seems like invoking God gets people to accept or be more trusting of AI decision-making. But then, then the question becomes, or rather, one of the obvious questions becomes, well, what's the mechanism behind that? Why is this phenomenon happening? And then they put in effort to tease out the mechanism. And, they believe that they have found it, or they have found part, or maybe the primary mechanism, where, again, when you invoke God, that perfect being, it calls or it brings one's attention to the fallibility, or, that humans are flawed. Therefore, they're more willing to trust an AI because they recognize that humans are flawed. And, they pretty much eased that out with the experiments that they ran for analysis. And so similar to here, like, yeah, they're, as we will see, they're finding this association, of like, oh, as automation or AI adoption increases, there appears to be an associated religious decline. And that holds even when we control for, all the other variables that we can think of, or the obvious variables that we can think of. So it's like, yeah, there's that association, but then again, the obvious question becomes, well, what exactly is going on there? Or what is actually driving this phenomenon? The why or the how is it happening? And you see, or as we will see, they try to tease that out. Okay, why does this association exist in the first place? What's going on? And that's why they say they want to focus on the mechanism in the last study, study 5, one of the last studies. So, study 1, robotics exposure explains religious declines across world nations. Here's where they're basically surveying millions of people across the world. Our first study tracked religious declines across world nations. We operationalized automation through each nation's yearly operational stock of industrial robots, defined as an automatically controlled, reprogrammable, multi-purpose, manipulator programmable on 3 or more axes. Oh yeah. Just going by, well, understandably, they have to come up with some sort of definition or used some sort of definition. They're talking about automation. What does automation mean? There can be multiple interpretations, so they're going with this one that is probably, standardized or, widely accepted across whatever field or discipline. Yeah, and it's by the International Federation of Robots. So I think a decent place to get your definition. Well, at least when it comes to, automation and robots. We operationalized religiosity through yearly survey data on the proportion of people across nations, about 2 million, or a little over 2 million, who answered yes to the question, is religion an important part of your daily life? Variations of this religious importance item are frequently used to measure religiosity across cultures because it can gauge religiosity across a variety of religious traditions and does not make assumptions about religious content. For example, monotheism, right? So even though probably monotheism is the most dominant, or rather, yeah, the most prevalent, dominant, but yeah, the most prevalent throughout the world. How do you assess religiosity globally? Probably not optimal to just ask, do you believe in God, or are you religious? And I'm sure there's some drawbacks to framing it like this, but they're trying to, from at least what I can tell, trying to be sort of as inclusive and comprehensive as possible. Just asking broadly, is religion an important part of your daily life? And so you're not only capturing, or largely capturing, or it's not biased towards monotheism. Combining these data sets, so variations of this religious importance, read that. So yeah, combining these data sets gave us data on 68 countries from 2006 to 2019, which we used to test whether robotic exposure could explain 21st century religious decline. So they did this over about 13 years. We controlled for several other variables. Our primary control variables involved other forms of technological change, mobile phone subscriptions per capita, and the share of population with access to electricity. Measuring telecommunication and energy development allowed us to test the role of robotics above and beyond general technological infrastructure. We also controlled for population size. Operational stock of robots could be larger in more populous countries. We also controlled for GDP per capita and individual choice norms around fertility. We controlled for these latter 2 variables because the existential theory of secularization suggests that wealth reduces religiosity because it increases certainty and stability. Whereas other theories focus on value change, one view suggests that religious decline occurs when cultures emphasize individual choice norms, for example, contraception over pro-fertility norms. Our methods section contains more information, about variants. So, cross-sectional models with intercepts varying randomly across nations found that robotics exposure was robustly and negatively associated with religiosity across the globe. Model 1. So basically, negative association as whatever automation or robotics increases in whichever country they're looking at, religiosity declines. And it seems like it holds across the globe, and after controlling for, the variables that they think are relevant. This negative association replicated controlling for GDP per capita and population size, and continued to reach significance, controlling for telecommunication and energy development. A longitudinal model with intercepts and slopes randomly varying across nations next estimated whether robotics was linked to declines in religiosity. In this model, the interaction between robotics and year was significant. This effect replicated controlling for the interaction of telecommunication development with the year and energy development with the year. Neither energy nor telecommunication development significantly explained declines in religiosity. Even after controlling for other things that might also contribute to their finding, or might play a part in their finding, the effect still remains. In the model, where we held these covariates constant, nations with a high operational stock of robots experienced an approximately 3% decline in religiosity per decade, whereas nations with a low operational stock showed approximately a 0.1% increase per decade. This may seem like a small effect, but it was substantially larger than any other geopolitical variables, and these small effects can fuel large divergences in religiosity over time. Figure 1 illustrates the dynamic, right? So here's their table. They go through like their effect and all the things that they control for, and even I think their model here, the last column, that's when they control for a bunch of other things. I believe they're going like systematically based off of how they describe it. They have model 1, they have model 2, model 3, all the way up to model 6. I have these 6 columns here, and they're pretty much going through all these variables, or rather, they're systematically controlling for these variables, kind of like one by one, and seeing if the effect is still there, of like, do you see this negative association between religiosity and increased automation / AI? And the answer appears to be yes. The effect still holds, even when controlling for all these other variables, like telecom development, energy development, GDP per capita, population size, and choice. So these cross-cultural analyses show that robotic exposure, measured here through the density of industrial robots, can explain variation in religiosity around the world and variation in global religious decline from 2006 to 2019. Robotics exposure was associated with religious decline above and beyond other forms of technological development, such as telecommunications development and energy development. Each of these results held controlling for GDP per capita and population size. In our supplemental analyses, we show that key findings replicate when controlling for spatial autocorrelation and when removing majority Muslim countries, which had low rates of robot workers and also low rates of religious decline. Analyses also replicate when we interact all variables with year instead of just technological innovations, and when we control for an alternative measure of individualism, which is more outdated but includes more nations. One interesting finding that emerges in this supplemental analysis is that individual choice norms around fertility, which have a strong negative cross-sectional relationship with religiosity, do not significantly predict 21st century religious decline. We discuss this curious result more in our general discussion. And going back to, rather, looking at one of their figures, this one. So yeah, as mentioned, they surveyed across the world, obviously not every single country, but I think it was 60 or 70 countries, approximately. Either way, I can just look at their list here. This looks like around 50 to 70 countries. So, and again, cross-culturally, because you have countries like United States and all the way to Kuwait, Puerto Rico, Bulgaria, And so they're tracking it over time. Rather, they're trying to track religiosity over time. That's on their x-axis. And so they have their first time point. And if I remember correctly, they're surveying from 2006, to 2019. So over a decade of time. So like they establish their baseline. That's their first time point. And then, the legend, green circle is if religion increased. And then the final time point, if religion declined, is in red. So yeah. Some of them did actually have this increase in religion. For example, Kuwait. And it seems like Kuwait and Qatar, reasonably sure, those are Muslim majority countries. And they said like when let's say removing Muslim majority countries, I think the effect got even larger. From a cursory glance, I think there's more red circles. And even then, more red circles with, larger lines, basically larger decreases in religiosity, as opposed to, there doesn't seem to be any super large increase in religiosity. Seems maybe at most in Turkey, maybe Kuwait. So study 2. Study 2 next tested for the relationship between robotics exposure and religious decline within a single nation, United States of America. So they started off, basically, it seems like their approach is, starting large, zoomed out, and then zooming in. So in study 1, as you just went through, they covered multiple countries across the world. Now they're focusing on one country, United States of America. Testing the relationship within the USA offered a more conservative test of our hypothesis, since regions within the USA are more religiously homogeneous than world nations, have more similar levels of technological development. We therefore could test whether robotics exposure explains religious decline controlling for other variables such as income, employment rate, and residential mobility, which do vary considerably across regions of the USA and have been linked to automation. So we again measured religiosity through the self-reported importance of religion, measured from 2008 to 2016 across metropolitan areas, and measured robotics exposure through the operational stock of industrial robots. Specifically, we used estimates released from the Brookings Institute of each metropolitan area's percent growth in industrial robot operational stock, henceforth called robotics growth, between 2010 and 2015. We combined these metrics into a dataset, which also included estimates of median income, unemployment, and residential mobility, first coded as number of non-movers across metropolitan areas. This dataset contained estimates from 110 metropolitan areas and over 1 million individuals within the USA, with time-varying religion data from 2008 to 2016 and time-invariant data on robotics growth, income, unemployment, and residential mobility. Yes. So, cross-sectional models with intercepts varying randomly across metropolitan areas and states found that metropolitan areas with high rates of robotics growth showed no significant differences in religiosity compared to metropolitan areas with low rates of robotic growth. This association remained null after controlling for unemployment, median income, population size, and number of non-movers. This cross-sectional association between robotics growth and religiosity is less meaningful across metropolitan areas than across world nations, because the distribution of robot workers in the USA has strong regional constraints based on the availability of warehouse space, unionization density, and proximity to travel networks. Our critical test was therefore whether robotics growth would explain religious declines. In this test of change over time, a longitudinal model with random intercepts and slopes. So, upon their first analysis, There's cross-sectional models. I'm not going to attempt to explain what exactly they're doing here because I don't fully know the type of statistical analysis that they're carrying out. But from what I gather of what they're saying, of like this analysis, basically they didn't find the effect. They didn't replicate the effect. They just went through in study 1, but then they're providing this explanation of like, well, yeah, they're using this particular model, but this particular model doesn't work here for the reasons that they outline. Yeah, less meaningful across metropolitan areas than across the world nations, because the distribution of robot workers in the USA has strong regional constraints based on the availability of warehouse space, etc. So they're changing like the analysis slash model that they're using, where like they're basically, they have this particular methodology when looking internationally at the multiple countries across the world, but then they say this is not appropriate. Use the same analysis when looking at one region, or rather one country, the United States. And so they're changing it, and they're justifying change. So they're going with a longitudinal model with random intercepts and slopes. We found that robotics growth interacted with time and significantly explained religious declines. Metropolitan areas with higher levels of robotics growth experienced an approximately 3% yearly decline in religion each decade, mirroring the effect size we observed in study 1, while metropolitan areas with lower levels of robotics growth experienced approximately a 0.5% yearly rise in religion. I think they got the exact that exact number in the first study of like a 3% decline per decade. So changing their model slash analysis probably appropriate. Where have to trust what they're saying and they're doing, because I'm not in a position to dissect the statistical analysis that they're carrying out here. This effect replicated controlling for the interaction of income and year, population size and year, and number of non-movers and year. No other factor explained religious decline in these models. These analyses show that robotics exposure can explain religious declines within a nation as well as across nations. Robotics growth was associated with religious declines across USA metropolitan areas, controlling for changes in income, residential mobility, and unemployment. In our S1 appendix, we present additional analyses where the time span of religious change is restricted to the same time window in which we have available data on robotics growth. In sum, studies 1 to 2 showed that robotics exposure explained religious decline across and within nations. However, research on the ecological fallacy and Simpson's paradox shows that group-level associations sometimes do not replicate and can even reverse at the individual level. Studies 1 to 2 also focused on exposure to automation through robotics, but this exposure can also happen through occupational work with AI algorithms. Studies 3 and 4 address both of these limitations, so that occupational exposure to AI was associated with declines in religiosity across individuals. Right, so again, they started off study 1 zoomed out, looking at, again, internationally across the world, and then they zoomed in a little bit, looking at the United States of America. But as they say, there's the ecological fallacy. Essentially, what you find at the group level is not necessarily what happens at the individual level. Kind of like the best way that I can summarize. And so they're trying to address that limitation, where pretty much trying to zoom in even more at the individual level. So study 3, AI exposure explains religious declines in a community setting. Study 3 was a pre-registered analysis of occupational AI exposure and religiosity within an 11-wave longitudinal study, which was conducted between 2009 and 2020 in a community setting. Participants in this multi-wave study answered several questions about their personal characteristics, and their social attitudes. 9 waves of the study included binary items, asking people if they believed in God, and if they identified as religious or non-religious. Key religion items were omitted from waves 1 and 6. Participants also free reported their occupation, if any, in all waves, which was manually coded by research assistants into one of 1,036 categories. For example, Social Security assessor and debt collector. In total, 69,021 individuals participated in at least one wave of the study, and 46,680 individuals reported their religion in multiple waves of the study. Our critical hypothesis was that occupational AI exposure would be associated with lower religiosity across individuals and religious decline within individuals. We measured occupational AI exposure by incorporating occupation-level metadata from ONET, large occupational database, which has classified occupations based on the importance of different occupational qualities. We use data on the importance of programming as a proxy for AI exposure. This proxy appeared face valid since many of the jobs with high importance of programming also involve AI exposure. For example, software engineer and web developer. We also controlled for importance of biology, chemistry, mathematics, and medicine dentistry to ensure that generalized scientific exposure or scientific education did not confound AI exposure. We also controlled for socioeconomic status, age, gender, and political conservatism. Our main analyses focused on God belief because it allowed us to test whether AI exposure was associated with religious beliefs rather than just self-reported importance of religiosity we had found in studies 1 to 2. We found similar results using the religious identification variable, and we summarized those results in S1 appendix. In general, God belief was stable across the study. God belief at wave 1 correlated at 0.75 with God belief at wave 11, but a notable proportion of people, 17.39%, changed their belief at least once across waves. Interesting. Or rather, I think interesting. Baseline analyses of occupational AI exposure and God belief showed that a random slopes and intercepts model outperformed a random intercepts model. In this random slopes and intercepts model, AI exposure and religiosity were negatively and significantly associated. Since occupational AI exposure was standardized through Z-scoring, odds ratio suggested that people with jobs that were 1 standard deviation higher than the mean on occupational exposure to AI were 45% less likely to believe in God compared to people in occupations that had a mean level of exposure to AI. So, again, they're zooming in more, and it seems like they're finding basically the same effect as when they were zoomed out and looking at, multiple countries across the world, and then the United States largely as a whole. Now they're zooming in on a specific sample. They're going from millions of people across the world to now tens of thousands of people. And it seems like they're tracking them across time. What their occupation is, and how much exposure to AI that they get in their occupation. And it seems like they are still finding the same effect of at the individual level, where, someone is exposed to AI, the more exposure to AI, and even above average exposure to AI, see increased likelihood that they will eventually lose their religion or not believe in God. Some subsequent models found that this association remained statistically significant, controlling for socioeconomic status, age, gender, and political conservatism, and after controlling for generalized scientific exposure. Right, so not necessarily, rather they're controlling for, basically just being exposed to, science and technology in general. It really is, it really does appear to be the AI. AI in this case refers to artificial intelligence, basically all the algorithms like ChatGPT, as an example. I think that's probably, the most popular example to give of AI, some sort of algorithm, basically. So in subsequent models, we added lag terms representing occupational exposure to AI at previous time points in the survey. So it's like, as an example, in this study here, you're looking at exposure to AI let's say at an individual level, especially when it comes to, you know, one's job, and if one's job exposes them to AI. So if, for example, as part of their employment, they are required, or like they're likely to use ChatGPT, they would be coded as, you know, a person who's exposed and uses AI. And if they're, you know, exposed to it, let's say above average compared to everyone else, there's a higher likelihood that basically will lose their religion, or, you know, profess some sort of, you know, skepticism towards God, or at some point, basically, kind of like lose their religion when they're tracking them over time. So yeah, and they're really looking at, as they say, occupational exposure to AI may increase someone's likelihood of losing their belief in God, even if they subsequently move into an occupation that no longer involves AI exposure. Figure 2 visualizes these effects, right? So it seems like, you know, you just need maybe just like a small dose, or some threshold dose exposure to AI, that, you know, might increase the chances that you're going to lose your belief in God or your religion. Because they're even tracking it of like, yeah, if they're moving from a job or an occupation that exposes them to AI, and then move to another one that they're no longer exposed to AI, the effect of basically losing your belief in God still appears to hold, or it's still there. So we also fit models which used a within-person centering procedure to separately estimate the within-person and between-person associations between occupational blah. Yes, a whole bunch of statistical analysis. In other words, occupational AI exposure explained variation in religious belief across individuals, but also religious decline in the same individual over time. Our S1 appendix contains several supporting analyses. These include a replication of our findings using the religious identification as an outcome instead of God belief. Robustness checks, which replicate our results using different subgroups of participants to rule out the possibility that our findings were confounded with selective attrition. Additional descriptive statistics concerning our key variables. Additional models, which control for general education rather than specific scientific knowledge. And a discussion of alternative modeling procedures. All analyses support our general conclusion that occupational exposure to AI is associated with lower religiosity between individuals and religious declines within individuals. You know, it seems like, at least based off of how they describe it, they're really trying to do their due diligence, their analysis, you know, to basically ensure, you know, what they're finding is a real, or I guess, to be more specific, a statistically significant finding, as in they're confident, you know, what they're finding, like, is real. Because, yeah, they have like a whole appendix. I haven't gone through it. Typically, supplemental material is not organized all that great, so it's not the easiest or the most fun to comb through, but maybe I should comb through it at some point. But even then, I'm not in a position to dissect their methodology, since I am absolutely not a statistician. Kind of have to trust, but at the very least, based on what they're saying, it appears like they are going to pretty great efforts to, you know, trying to control for all the things they think they should control for. So yeah, study 4. AI exposure explains religious declines within an organization. So they're zooming in even more. Studies like 1 and 2, they're working with like millions of people. Again, I'm repeating myself, but, you know, starting off with study 1, it's millions of people in different countries across the world, so like really zoomed out. And then in study 2, they're looking at, you know, the United States as a whole, you know, multiple regions across the United States. And then study 3, the one that we just went through, pretty much zooming in even more. They're looking at, you know, tens of thousands of people Uh, pretty much going from, tens of thousands, going from millions to tens of thousands, and really tracking them over time. So again, zoomed in even more. And they're still getting the same findings. And now in study 4, they're zooming in more. Where now they're looking at an organization. So they're looking at 238 employees. So study 4 was a pre-registered 3-wave study in which we measured occupational AI exposure in a manufacturing plant as it integrated AI technology. We followed 238 employees within the organization over time, directly measuring their exposure to AI and their religious profiles, intrinsic religiosity and fundamentalism at time 1 or T1, their perceived religious importance over the last week, and their frequency of religious behaviors over the last week at time 2, and supervisor reports of employee workplace behaviors at time 3. Study 4 was the most conservative test of our hypothesis because it featured the smallest and most homogeneous sample. Participants were primarily Muslim and took place over the narrowest time frame, 3 weeks. This study also allowed us to explore the consequences of AI-linked religious decline for workplace behavior. So, that's, again, pros and cons, or, the advantages and disadvantages, what level your analysis is. Of, like, as mentioned before, they started off zoomed out, and, the advantage is, like, they surveyed a lot of people, millions of people across the world, so cross-culturally. But then, they're getting, like, survey data. Arguably not the highest quality of data. But then, they zoomed in even more, in the last study, looking at, a specific population, United States, tens of thousands of people. And so, like, they're getting better quality data, but they're looking at a smaller sample size. And here, they're again, zoomed in, looking at hundreds of people, but now they're pretty much tracking them at multiple time points. They're getting higher quality data, but as they say, it's a more homogeneous sample, so it's not cross-cultural. It's only, as they say, primarily Muslim. And then, they're only tracking them over 3 weeks. Advantage and disadvantages. So, because of space limitations, we present the T1 and T2 findings in the paper. We replicate our findings in Study 3. Initial analyses found that T1 AI exposure was negatively associated with T2 religiosity. This association was stronger for the items measuring participants' subjective religious importance over the last week than for the items measuring frequency of religious behaviors over the last week. This association alone is limited because less religious people may have been faster to adopt AI technology. However, we found that the negative association replicated when we controlled for T1 religious fundamentalism and intrinsic religiosity, suggesting that AI predicts declines in religiosity as well as cross-sectional variation in religiosity. We provide more analyses and statistics in our S1 appendix. These analyses also consider downstream associations with participants' T3 workplace behaviors that have been linked to religiosity. For example, unethical behavior, trust, ability, organizational citizens of behavior, which are face-valid indicators of prosociality. We find that declines in religiosity predict changes in many of these variables. In sum, studies 3 to 4 show that exposure to AI is linked to declines in religiosity at the individual level. Occupational exposure to AI correlated with lower levels of religiosity across and within individuals, even controlling for covariance. Moreover, AI exposure predicted future declines in religion. So, I think that increases the robustness and confidence of their findings, because again, I can't stress it enough. They started off zoomed out, but then they zoomed in, and they're really trying to assess what is going on at the individual level, and they even talk about it, this ecological fallacy, ecological fallacy, where just because you're finding something at the group level doesn't mean that it holds true at the individual level. So like they zoomed in and tried to get as close to the individual level as reasonably possible. And it seems like they did that. And it seems like the finding still holds true. So, learning about AI decreases religious conviction in an experimental paradigm. Our final study was a pre-registered experiment testing whether learning about advances in AI would temporarily decrease religious conviction to a greater extent than learning about other scientific advances. This experiment also explored the properties of AI that might explain why learning about AI reduces religious conviction. We were particularly interested in whether people perceive AI like a god to operate outside the laws of nature compared to traditional sciences such as chemistry, biology, and medicine. To do this, we asked people whether they associated AI and other scientific advances with discovering and applying laws of nature, with the implicit view that domains associated with laws of nature like gravity, matter, and motion would be more constrained by these laws. This approach has limitations. For example, being associated versus constrained by laws of nature are not interchangeable. But we felt that this approach was less demand-laden than nudging participants to think of automation versus science as godlike, which could interfere with our central dependent variable, religious conviction. We used a between-subjects design to test our hypothesis. In a general sample of 1,400 participants with a range of religious beliefs, were randomly assigned to read about 3 advances in science or AI, which were matched on domain, for example, language, medicine, or agriculture, and length, 1 paragraph. For example, participants in the AI condition read about ChatGPT, whereas participants in the science condition read about a recently published study showing that Broca's area involved in the production of sign language. This is an area of the brain, Broca. Participants rated each automation scientific advance on its impressiveness, technological sophistication, and the extent that it was associated with laws of nature. They also rated the extent that each advance increased versus decreased their religious conviction. We fit general linear models with Gaussian estimation, testing whether advances decrease, blah, 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 yes, but their overall main findings. And our results are virtually identical regardless of these controls. As we predicted, participants viewed AI advances as less associated from laws of nature than scientific advances. We also found that participants reported less religious conviction in the AI condition versus the science condition. The effect on religious conviction was larger among participants who identified as religious. Than non-religious. Yeah, so the effect on religious conviction was larger among participants who identified as religious than non-religious. Presumably because religious conviction had a greater range of variance for religious participants. Effects broken down by each domain of innovation are summarized in Figure 3. Figure 3 also reports a 5,000 sample bootstrapped multi-mediational model in which we find that these laws fully made the effect. Yes. I mean, this Figure 3 not super interesting. Critical. So the expression Deus ex machina, or God out of the machine, describes an improbable event that resolves a literary plotline. The expression is a metaphor. God does not actually appear out of machines, stories, but the expression's inverse could be more literal. Over the last several decades, the world has witnessed a kind of machina ex deus. Innovations in AI and robotics have spread rapidly around the world and captured public interest, whereas religiosity has declined in many regions at a historically unprecedented pace. Here, we suggest that these trends are not correlated by coincidence, but that there are meaningful properties of automation which encourage religious decline. We support our hypothesis with 5 studies comprising millions of people. Our studies show that religious declines have been fastest in nations and geographical regions with high levels of robots, and that this relationship cannot be explained by key technological or socioeconomic variables. We also found that entering occupations that involved more AI exposure is associated with lower levels of religiosity between individuals and declining belief in God within individuals, and that exposure to AI is associated with religious decline in an organization incorporating AI technology. In Study 5, we show that learning about advances in AI is associated with greater reductions in religious conviction than learning about scientific advances. Our studies demonstrate that automation is linked to religious decline across multiple religious traditions, for example, Christian, Muslim, and Buddhist, world regions, North America, South Asia, and Oceania, and levels of analysis. So, yeah, it's not just isolated to one specific religion or one specific region, kind of like a largely global phenomenon. So, like what they found at the zoomed out level holds true at the individual level. Our S1 appendix provide robustness tests for each of our studies. They also summarize additional studies which explore nuances and implications of these findings. Study S1, as noted in the introduction, finds that learning about AI in an intensive day-long seminar increased people's belief that technology has given humans superhuman abilities, that is, to play God and break laws of nature. As I sort of touched upon earlier, with this artificial womb technology, I think it's fair to say that many people would characterize that as playing God or breaking the laws of. Attending this seminar also decreased the perceived importance of prayer and service attendance at work among highly religious people, but not less religious people. Studies S2 to 3 explore how religiosity correlates with favorability toward automation. Religious people around the world and across the United States are less favorable to automation than non-religious individuals, even controlling for their favorability towards science, and view automation as less compatible with religion, scientific discipline. 3. And so what they're saying here, pretty much, at least my understanding, lies in the face study here that I went over a few streams of, where thinking about God increases acceptance of artificial intelligence decision making. Whereas they say, we find that God's salience heightens AI acceptance. Obviously, God different than religion, even though there's obviously strong overlap, distinction to make God versus being religious. But yeah, religious people around the world and across the United States are less favorable. But I guess God's salience versus religious. And there's also some nuance there. Where, religious people might be less favorable towards AI, but then once you make God salient, and I think, if I remember correctly, that's sort of what they find here, of even when they focus in on religious people, they can still get the effect of increasing the acceptance towards AI. So, what they're saying here, I think at some level, flies in the face, or is somewhat contradictory to the findings of this study. But I think at another level, at a deeper level, in alignment. So there are multiple potential explanations behind this negative correlation. For example, favorability toward automation may lead to religious decline, resulting in a negative correlation with variables. Religious individuals may also report more negative attitudes towards automation because they feel more threatened by automation than non-religious individuals. Our introduction focuses on the possibility that automation is decreasing the instrumental value of religion. However, we also acknowledge that there may be other mechanisms at play across our studies. We empirically explore these mechanisms in other supplemental studies. For example, one alternative mechanism is that the activities and challenges inherent in occupations involving automation are less likely to inspire religiosity compared to the activities and challenges involved in occupations that do not involve automation. Study S4 finds some support for this mechanism, showing that activities associated with AI occupations are viewed as more focused and mechanistic how questions rather than existential why questions. And by virtue of this association, they are less likely to inspire religious devotion. activities associated with other fields of science and technology. Finally, study S5 tests whether religious people anticipate becoming less religious when they enter a job in AI versus in medicine, providing evidence that religious individuals accurately predict the religious declines that we observed in Study 3. Altogether, these studies further support our hypothesis, but also foreshadow future questions. For example, what extent people make a conscious decision to deconvert in automated spaces. So it seems like, based off of the way that they phrase it, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's like people can almost predict that they'll become less religious as they interface more and more with AI. So yeah, it begs the question, someone deconverts. How much is that a conscious decision versus subconscious, whatever. There are important limitations of this research program. For example, our theory focuses on religion as a way to satisfy instrumental human needs, but people also turn to religion for moral guidance and purpose. Because people are generally averse to machines making decisions in moral contexts, religion might endure as a moral institution in the age of automation. This is ultimately an open question, however, given the emergence of AI in moral decision-making, given that some people have begun losing faith in religion's moral value, particularly in Catholic cultures, where church scandals have undermined the moral authority of the church. As they sort of highlight and explicitly say, maybe part of this erosion of religiosity is have substitutes when it, or rather, AI and technology is acting as a substitute, but there still might be a place for it because we'll go to it for also reasons like purpose and morality, or moral decision making, as they say. But then what happens when we get to that place where AI maybe at some point acts as a substitute or maybe even full replacement for moral decision making, and that instead of whatever consulting religion, we actually can consult an AI saying what is the right moral decision to make circumstance or situation. I think that poses an interesting question. We encourage future research that integrates these streams of research to identify the distinct causes of religious decline. In our S1 appendix, we write more about how to synthesize these literatures. Another limitation of our research is that we conceptualized automation broadly. For example, in studies 1 to 2, we measured automation through the size of the robotics industry, whereas in studies 3 to 4, we measured automation through individual people's workplace exposure to AI. At the national and regional level, it's difficult to disentangle these measures. Nations with large robotics industries also have higher levels of AI integration than nations with smaller robotics industries. However, these different kinds of automation exposure could be studied separately at the individual level. Encourage future research to test how different kinds of automation exposure may have different effects on religious decline. For example, when automation resembles mechanization, for example, factory assembly lines, people should be less convinced of automation's potential to impact and improve human life. We encourage future research to test whether these occupations are boundary conditions for our theory. In early theories of secularization, Marx, Weber, Durkheim, and Freud each wrote that technological advancements inherent in industrialization would contribute to a widespread loss of religion. Contrary to these predictions, industrialization did not spell the end for religion, but automation may bring late vindication, at least in industrialized countries. Our findings show that the rise of AI and robotics has been a crucial and overlooked mechanism for explaining religious declines. Our data do not imply that religion is facing worldwide extinction. If anything, religion is polarizing across world regions. But our studies do suggest that current trends in automation may foreshadow religiosity trends in the near and distant. I think a nice paragraph to end on. I'm not going to dissect the methodology. It doesn't seem like there's any major or even minor conflicts of interest, which I don't think really fathom there would be. I think this is just, trying to answer some questions, not trying to develop any sort of product, whatnot. So I think super interesting, super cool, and again, like the other side of the coin to this research. So those are the major pieces, or that is the major piece that I want to cover for this stream. And I guess maybe as I'm gonna cover this tomorrow. I guess as a preview for tomorrow. So a while back, I think over a year ago now, I did a stream devoted to MDMA, and I did sort of a series on psychedelics, but I don't think I finished it, unfortunately. But yeah, I did. I think I did a stream devoted to ketamine, and a stream devoted to MDMA. I should probably, or almost certainly, do a stream devoted to like LSD and the other psychedelics. But I covered this study in depthly at the time. I covered MDMA in depthly at the time. And this was like a really cool study. Oh, and Lesbian Hot Sauce, welcome. Howdy to you as well. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for passing by. And yeah, again, looking forward to the discussion. And I'm definitely going to be reading more and more research on long COVID in the meantime, not only for the discussion, but also to prepare streams devoted to covering long COVID research. Because yeah, no surprise, there is a more and more everyday research coming out, trying to really understand and characterize long COVID. Oh, I'm super sorry to hear that. I'm hoping that is just a minor issue with your dog, and that they can quickly recover from it. But yeah, a pet being sick, never a fun time at all. I can't speak from personal experience as someone who has lost quite a number of pets in my lifetime. Which, well, I'm not saying that's happening for you. I'm just saying it's never easy to see something you care about, be in discomfort or suffering. But yeah, this study, super cool study. Yeah, sending as much positive vibes your way as I can. And I'm curious if you want to share what breed of dog or mixed dog, if you know, do you have? In my lifetime, I've had a golden lab, I've had German Shepherd, so medium-sized dogs, but I've had Dachshunds, Yorkshire Terriers, and a couple of other terriers, but I can't remember the breeds. In addition to a bunch of cats as well. And yeah, we're sort of, I'm mostly giving a preview for what I hope to go over tomorrow. Oh, super cool, French Poodle. Where, yeah, I covered this study a while back about MDMA, and it seems like, there's a lot of promising research coming out about MDMA, and this is like one of them at the time. But this study, I think it's like 3 or 4 years old. I think it was 2019. Yeah, 2021. Yeah, it can't be 2019 because I wasn't streaming in 2019. And well, Kitty, I don't necessarily disagree. I make my stance on cats pretty clear. Even though I love dogs, I love both cats and dogs. I definitely lean more towards cats. But yeah, this study was super cool for a variety of reasons. One, because of, well, it's psychedelic research. And two, it's because, like, yeah, severe PTSD, basically, from what I gather from the research, no real good treatments, or really, arguably, like, no effective treatments for severe PTSD. And this is basically a very difficult patient population to treat. Understandably so. And it seems like, MDMA was basically, potentially revolutionary, or, might be one of the first actual, effective therapies that, might be approved if the finding holds true. Because as they say, it pretty much blew the competition out of the water, where it's like, of all the approved things for PTSD, severe PTSD, the MDMA in this study appeared to be like the most effective. And I've highlighted it here, well, at the time, where yeah, an estimated 40 to 60% of patients do not respond to these compounds. And like, yeah, likewise, although evidence-based trauma-focused psychotherapy, such as prolonged exposure and cognitive behavioral therapy, are considered to be the gold standard treatments for PTSD, many participants fail to respond or continue to have significant symptoms, and dropout rates are high. Novel, cost-effective therapeutics are therefore desperately needed. So, like, there's this huge patient need for effective therapies for individuals with severe PTSD. And it seems like, MDMA, based off this study, seems super promising. And as you can see, there's a whole host of researchers involved. And actually of note, this person here, so I think pretty noteworthy, I think, in the trauma world, or at least when it comes to trauma treatment. I believe they're a psychiatrist. And they're actually an author as well, because I read their book. Called, yeah. So yeah, this book. Yeah, that's the author, Bessel van der Kolk. I believe they're Danish, or some Nordic, Scandinavian country. And yeah, they're involved in this research, not surprisingly, because that is essentially like one of their, I think, the area of expertise. But then published, I think, about a month ago or a couple months ago, there's essentially a follow-up to this that I'm almost certainly going to cover tomorrow. And again, you have a group of researchers. It's essentially largely the same group of researchers. You'll have this Bessel van der Kolk individual here. And same first author, Jennifer Mitchell. So yeah, this is 2021. Okay. At June 2021. Well, that's an excellent question. Well, based off of what I'm sort of gathering, because again, I haven't gone through this study yet, but if the findings from this research in 2021 hold in this research 2023, just in the past month or so, then I think there's good reasons to believe that it will become a first-line treatment, because it seems like pretty much it will be like the best that we have, assuming, again, the findings here are replicated in this follow-up study. And I don't know for sure, but I assume it would be combined. It can be combined with CBT, because again, I highlight this over and over, but this is MDMA assisted therapy. So they're not just giving MDMA, okay, and sending patients on their way. I try to highlight this as much as I can, because I think many people overlook this, where it's very common, at least in the psychedelic research that I read and I've covered. They're not only giving the psychedelic. It's very often paired with therapy, and they're having like intensive therapy sessions as they are doing the MDMA. That's why it's MDMA assisted therapy, and it's pretty much like the same title, MDMA assisted therapy, but this one, it's severe PTSD, and now it seems like they're expanding it for how well does it hold up for moderate to severe PTSD. And yeah, you have Jennifer Mitchell again, so pretty much same first author. So I'm gonna read this like tonight or tomorrow, and probably cover it tomorrow. But from what I gather, I think they pretty much overall reach the same conclusions of like, yeah, this is potentially a game changer when it comes to the treatment of, I guess in this case, not just severe PTSD, but moderate to severe PTSD. Looking forward to going over it and also reading. Yeah, so, and the research on psychedelics, still in its infancy, and I'm definitely not an expert on psychedelics. At least not when it comes to treatment. I can talk about what it's doing at a biochemical level, and like what it's doing in the brain, etc., etc., and some of the neuroscience. But when it comes to how it acts as a therapy, definitely not my area of expertise. But I think many people are understandably latching onto research like this justify their psychedelic use, which is not to say that you can't do it or shouldn't do it, but I think many people are using it with the intention to treat something because they see research like this and think that, okay, well, psychedelics are now like a valid treatment. This is still in the clinical trial phase, and I think very often many people overlook the fact that these psychedelics are often coupled with assisted therapy, and it's typically often it's not the psychedelic alone. And Ogform, welcome. Thank you so much for passing. What I've heard is it has to do with memory encoding. Are you referring to MDMA or mushrooms? Oh yeah, so that's an excellent question. So here is where I'm going to defer experts. I've covered some of this. So, I think last year? Yeah, last year. Yeah, 2022. And yeah, I have no doubt. So, you touch upon what you brought up, Hogform. From what I understand, at least when it comes to PTSD, okay, and treatment of PTSD, and this is why it's like assisted therapy. I believe, okay, and I'm also basing some of this off of, I read this person's book, The Body Keeps the Score, pretty good book, and they are a psychiatrist, but I believe, at least for some people, or for some treatments of trauma, part of it is kind of like confronting your trauma, maybe not reliving it, basically, I guess in some sense, confronting it, just or even just maybe getting a person to recognize that they actually have trauma, because like very often, well, understandably, with really traumatic experiences, don't actually remember that they have traumatic experiences, because like, yeah, it seems like for some people the brain protects itself and will like suppress or like basically compartmentalize those memories and make them difficult to retrieve, and so I suspect, at least based off of what I know, which is not an expert, part of it might be this basically memory encoding and getting people to kind of like maybe not relive those memories but confront those memories, and maybe there's also the fact that MDMA, if I remember correctly, seems to kind of like to some extent foster or like make people more open, or put their brain in a state that allows them to form new neural pathways. But I also have research that I'm going to go over on MDMA and how we're sort of slowly teasing out what it's doing at the level of the brain. And so to answer that question in serotonin, so I'm just gonna defer to the experts, or rather what seems to be a debate playing out, I guess, whatever, psychological slash psychiatric world. So like in 2022, so last year, this review was published, and it made headlines. I covered at the time, where based off of this review, okay, and this is an umbrella review, apparently regarded as a high quality review, very thorough, and the conclusion that they come to based off of this review, and attempting to be thorough, they say they come to the conclusion that there's no evidence that supports the hypothesis that serotonin, or like this serotonin theory of depression, basically not supported by the evidence. And they highlight, or I highlighted it, where the main areas of serotonin research provide no consistent evidence of there being an association between serotonin and depression, and no support for the hypothesis that depression is caused by lower serotonin activity or concentrations. Some evidence was consistent with the possibility that long-term antidepressant use reduces serotonin concentration. There's that, but, okay, here we're seeing science play out. Because just a few months ago, I think it was earlier this year, there was this response study, okay, and it's a response to this study here, and so this was an umbrella review of the evidence, and they follow up. A leaky umbrella has little value. Evidence clearly indicates the serotonin system is implicated in depression, and they highlight some of the flaws in their methodology that this review, I guess, did. And they're pretty much, and just as you have multiple researchers involved here, you have even more researchers involved here. And as I've highlighted, okay, not just for their name, David Nutt, but also this person, I know them as someone who covers pretty heavily the psychedelic research. They are involved, or they're typically involved in a lot of psychedelic research. Yeah, I mean, they wrote a whole review on psychedelic drugs. And so they're pretty much saying, like, hey, this review here was kind of like dismissing the serotonin theory of depression. And these researchers followed up this year, a few months ago. This is, June 2023, saying, hey, the analysis that you carried out, basically, in their opinions and based off of their analysis, was not a good analysis. And then they cover some of the actual research that supports the serotonin theory of depression, saying, hey, basically saying, not so fast. They're explicitly saying it in the title, where evidence clearly indicates the serotonin system is implicated in depression. So clearly, there's maybe a little bit of a divide. I don't know how much of a divide, because I'm not in the, not a psychiatrist, and I'm not in, not in the field. So this is, the debate is playing out. And given the fact that, there's a lot of research involved here, at least I read this entire study on stream, and I was pretty convinced, because they highlight specific studies that are pretty convincing to show that serotonin is implicated in depression. We may not know exactly like what's going on with serotonin, but it seems like it's pretty clear, okay, or they have a high degree of confidence that serotonin is playing some sort of role in depression. So, essentially saying, let's not dismiss it just yet. It's super premature to dismiss it. And so I just gotta wait and see, basically, on this, where like I will defer to the experts and the debate. Oh, and Discount Seth Rogen, welcome. Great to see you. Hope you're doing well. I'm not surprised to hear this, but surely there is some efficacy. They usually are SSRIs. I've never looked through. So yeah, that's the thing. Where clearly, and I've looked at some of the randomized control trials for SSRIs, of which there are many of them, at least these days. Not just the Prozac. And not only do you have SSRIs, but you have SNRIs. And it's clear, not just from the randomized controlled trial data, but also from people that I know personally, where SSRIs, appear to have really helped them in a beneficial a really beneficial manner, almost like dramatically improving their lives. Now, obviously, those are just anecdotes, but even then, the randomized controlled trial data are there. But that's where, it gets tricky. Because just because SSRIs are effective doesn't necessarily mean that, it's serotonin at play. I think, there's a strong case to make there. But very often, drugs act in a variety of mechanisms that we don't fully always know, or we very often haven't fully characterized everything there is to know about a drug. And that, it might be some other effect that the SSRI is having. I don't think there's any reason to believe that now, but it's totally possible. After taking a class about drugs in college, the next semester took the rock and roll. I had to understand the substance really. That makes total sense. And this is just from what I know from anecdotes from people in my life of like, yeah, for some people, taking psychedelics really enhances the musical experience. And that, it's almost like transformative. Yeah, which is great to hear. And again, I know quite a few people personally where both SSRIs and SNRIs have really improved the quality of life. And so, here's where it almost doesn't matter to some extent, at least when it comes to the patient level. Like, does it matter whether or not serotonin is playing a role in, your mental health, your depression, anxiety, whatever. But what matters at the patient level is like, is it actually effective? Sure, it matters when it comes to hopefully developing better treatments for depression, where, hopefully, that is the ultimate goal of like, well, the better we understand depression, hopefully we can actually come up with better treatments. Because even though, thankfully, we do have some treatments, quite a few treatments for depression, there is still quite a few people who have depression where they are treatment resistant. And that's why I've also covered psychedelics. And I think some of the ketamine research, and ketamine seems to hold some promise when it comes to depression. And I think I have a study. I don't know if I saved it just yet. So yeah, this is so there's treatment-resistant depression, as the term implies. So even though there are people that totally respond positively to SSRIs and SNRIs, there's a whole category of treatment-resistant depression patients. And at least so far, from what I gather from the research, the best treatment that we have that I would say is approved is, electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, kind of like a, shock therapy. So how it's depicted in movies doesn't, not how it's done now these days, from what I understand. Like these days when people are given electroconvulsive therapy, they're sedated. This is not to say that, it's this perfectly smooth sailing therapy. But I think hopefully far less like traumatic than how it's depicted in films and media. And I believe there's research that has come out pretty much that was... Yes. Yeah, I think I've covered this at the time. But I believe there's more and more research coming out like this, where it seems like ketamine might be equivalent, maybe arguably better than the best treatment that we have, which is this electroconvulsive therapy. This one from 2019, but I believe there's newer research I think it's from the New England Journal of Medicine, where I believe they basically found the same thing, where ketamine seems to be holding more and more promise. Again, it's still sort of like in the clinical trials phase, not fully approved. So, not like the full rubber stamp approval. But basically, ketamine seems pretty promising so far, just as MDMA, pretty promising so far. And yeah, totally, you know, if I ever got to the place, you know, if I'm ever diagnosed with treatment-resistant depression, and it was put before me, electroconvulsive therapy or ketamine, I totally go with ketamine, for sure. But even then, there's still quite a few unanswered questions, I think, with ketamine, where, yeah, I don't think we have good long-term data. Ketamine, don't think. And I think there are some safety concerns when it comes to people taking ketamine long-term, as it is a dissociative, and I think there are some potential issues when it comes to taking a dissociative long-term, I believe. So yeah, this is what I plan to cover tomorrow, in addition to some other cool, well, I think, cool research. But to sort of wrap up, I have some smaller articles, maybe not so promising in terms of research. Maybe more of a downer. Which one do I start with? So I have this. The food industry pays influencer dietitians to shape your eating habits. I actually do want to read this. I'm going to start with this. But yeah, you know, we're for the past whatever decade or so, you know, we're in the age of social media. You know, people are now, not now, but they have been for quite a while, not only getting news, but they're getting information, and now health information, diet information from social media influencers. And you know, dietitians, generally speaking, in North America, if I remember correctly, United States and Canada, dietitian is a regulated term in comparison to a nutritionist. Basically, just about anyone in North America, I believe, generally speaking, can label themselves as a nutritionist. But a dietitian, that is, you know, a regulated term. You are a registered dietitian, or basically medical professional. And so it's problematic if, you know, dietitians are being paid off to basically disseminate bad health information. Have you ever looked into studies exploring the relationship between innate immune system? Absolutely. Totally. Especially when it comes to, yeah, inflammation in the brain and neuroinflammation and its association with depression. And that, you know, yeah. So I should probably maybe even do a stream devoted to that. But totally, I'm aware of the association, but and well, I can even relate it. So fair enough. So I'll even relate it to my own, you know, inflammatory condition. So do. So, you know, my condition, Crohn's disease, is associated with psychiatric. You know, those individuals diagnosed with Crohn's disease or any form of IBD are generally at, you know, 2, 3, 4 times increased risk of being diagnosed with anxiety or depression, and a slight increase in attempted suicide. And, you know, understandably, okay, part of this is explained by just the fact that, you know, it affects your quality of life. You know, no surprise when something significantly and very negatively affects your quality of life, you know, you're at greater risk of anxiety and depression. But there's also the fact that, you know, Crohn's disease is an inflammatory condition. And even though generally speaking, okay, when it comes to, at least when it comes to Crohn's disease and also, well, IBD in general, you know, yes, a large portion of the inflammation is generally like localized to the gastrointestinal tract, or like, you know, that's the hallmark of the condition, inflammation in the GI tract. But as it's been known for quite a while, it's not always isolated there, as in totally, Crohn's disease, a diagnosis of Crohn's disease, is associated with arthritis basically throughout the body, from eyes in uveitis to your joints, and also just having a diagnosis of Crohn's disease puts you at risk for other inflammatory conditions like psoriasis, ankylosing spondylitis, etc., etc. It just got so Crohn's, if I remember correctly, not T cell mediated and a whole host of other. I mean, the inflammation in Crohn's disease is highly complex. But so not B cell mediated, or largely not B cell mediated, because, or one of the reasons, because generally speaking, you don't find auto antibodies, or at least you don't find the hallmark auto antibodies when it comes to Crohn's disease. This is why, arguably, that is an excellent question. So, classically, or, traditionally, it was categorized as an autoimmune condition. But I think that paradigm has shifted in the past 10, 15 years, where you go to other okay, so autoimmune, as the term implies, from Latin auto, self, so self-immune, and Crohn's disease was generally put in that category, and I think even still today it's referred to as that, which understandably, it's an inflammatory condition, and as mentioned, a diagnosis of Crohn's disease. Autoimmune conditions tend to cluster, and that if you're diagnosed with one, you're just more likely to be diagnosed with another. Diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, more likely to be diagnosed with, psoriasis, ankylosing spondylitis, lupus, etc., etc. Now they tend to cluster. Hashimoto's. And so it's associated with, an overactive immune response. As in, basically, the immune system appears to be, ramped up. And that also appears to be the case with Crohn's disease, in terms of, they're all, virtually all autoimmune conditions are associated with inflammation. And the overall general strategy when it comes to treating autoimmune conditions, generally speaking, is, suppression of the immune system. And the medications that are used for, there's a lot of overlap when it comes to the treatment of autoimmune conditions. There are treatments for rheumatoid arthritis, very often are effective treatments for Crohn's disease. Humira is, I think, a classic example of it's approved for both Crohn's disease and rheumatoid arthritis. And, very often, Crohn's disease gets the hand-me-down for rheumatoid arthritis, at least in the past, where it's oh, it was found that it was great for rheumatoid arthritis, let's try it for Crohn's disease. Although now more and more things are being targeted toward. But there's some interesting things about Crohn's disease that, let's say, calls into question whether or not it's an actual classic or traditional autoimmune condition. One, as mentioned, you don't find autoantibodies, at least not the traditional autoantibodies, that you find in other autoimmune conditions. And two, you don't find the same gender distribution or sex distribution that you find with other classical autoimmune conditions, where, generally speaking, autoimmune conditions, women are largely affected, or disproportionately affected, 60, 70%, for whatever reason that I don't think we quite fully understand. as opposed to when you look at Crohn's disease, it's like pretty much like an even, gender sex split, where it seems like men and women are equally affected. And then more and more research appears to be coming out, where you're finding deficiencies in the immune system, which maybe I should cover in more detail at a later point. But basically, I believe paradigm is slowly shifting. I think has shifted for a while, where I think people now that refer to it as an autoimmune condition are pretty much wrong at this point, because this is from 2010, I believe. 2010. And I have some other follow-up articles pretty much showing pretty clear there are some immune deficiency when it comes to Crohn's. And it's not just a simple, I have this, I should have it. I have it in some other folder. Regardless, I'll have to dig them up. But yeah, I think it's, at least in my opinion, although I interface with experts, such as my own doctor. But yeah, I think it's pretty fair to say Crohn's is, at least at the very least, it does not quite behave as the more traditional or conventional autoimmune condition. Yeah, so it sounds like that, but monoclonal antibodies are totally used all the time. I personally am on one, have been for decades and decades. So, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, pretty much like one of the kind of like classic, basic tests for autoimmune conditions is an anti-nuclear antibody, or ANA. And that's why they say, and pretty much as you pointed out, Sjogren's, or lupus, which, Sjogren's, I believe, the tear ducts. So you have, you typically, or very often, if you have one of these conditions, the more classical autoimmune conditions, you will have a positive ANA, or your anti-nuclear antibody test will be positive, because there are autoantibodies, antibodies directed against the self. But as you can see, Crohn's disease does not show up here. And interestingly enough, what does show up is this p-ANCA. So there are antibodies, so these are paranuclear anti-nuclear cytoplasmic antibody, and so p-ANCA, but basically you do find antibodies, but you don't find autoantibodies, basically saying, like, it seems like, you do have an overactive immune system, but it seems like, the immune system is actually responding, like, to something, or it's trying to respond to something that's, like, not actually the self. The self might be sort of like collateral damage, so to speak, but this isn't, like, fully teased. So all great questions. Oh, yeah, no worries. And I certainly hope that your dog is okay. Yes, totally. You, should have full access. So, going through this article, the food industry pays influencer dietitians to shape your eating habits. As the World Health Organization raised questions this summer about the risks of a popular artificial sweetener, a new hashtag began spreading on the social media accounts of health professionals: safety of aspartame. Steph Grasso, a registered dietitian from Oakton, Virginia, used the hashtag and told her 2.2 million followers on TikTok that the WHO warnings about artificial sweeteners were clickbait based on low-quality science. Another dietitian, Cara Harbstreet of Kansas City, reassured her Instagram followers not to worry about fear-mongering headlines about aspartame because the evidence doesn't suggest there's a return. Oh, absolutely my pleasure. More than happy to share any study if I have access to them. In a third video, Mary Ellen Phipps, a Houston area dietitian who specializes in diabetes care, sipped from a glass of soda and told her Instagram viewers that artificial sweeteners satisfy the desire for sweetness without affecting blood sugar or insulin levels. What these dietitians didn't make clear was that they were paid to post the videos by American Beverage, a trade and lobbying group representing Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and other companies. Really disturbing. You know, where's the professional integrity? But I don't teach. I don't really think that. I don't think that's part of the curriculum, either when it comes to being a doctor or a dietitian, or even, you know, as a scientist. They don't teach professional integrity. In all, at least 35 posts from a dozen health professionals were part of the coordinated campaign by American Beverage. The trade group paid an undisclosed amount to 10 registered dietitians, as well as a physician and fitness influencer, to use their social media accounts to help blunt the WHO's claims that aspartame, a mainstay of Diet Coke and other sodas, is ineffective for weight loss and possibly carcinogenic. The campaign, which the beverage group acknowledged organizing, highlighted a little-known tactic the multi-billion-dollar food and beverage industry is using to sway consumers faced with often contradictory health messages about popular products. The food, beverage, and dietary supplement industries are paying dozens of registered dietitians that collectively have millions of social media followers to help sell products and deliver industry-friendly messages on Instagram and TikTok, according to an analysis by the Washington Post and The Examination, a new nonprofit newsroom specializing in global public health reporting. The analysis of thousands of posts found that companies and industry groups paid dietitians for content that encouraged viewers to eat candy and ice cream, downplayed the health risks of highly processed foods, and pushed unproven supplements, messages that run counter to decades of scientific evidence about healthy eating. The review found that among 68 dietitians with 10,000 or more social media followers on TikTok or Instagram, about half had promoted food, beverages, or supplements to their combined 11 million followers last year. Yeah, you know, and this aspect of finding health advice, you know, on TikTok. Covered this study before, or, you know, basically, at least when it comes to this study, TikTok basically not a good source of information when it comes to ADHD, or probably not anything at all, really. And that really one should be very careful when assessing any sort of information on social media or even in a Twitch stream, like mine. While some dietitians noted in their social media posts that they were part of paid partnerships, their relationships with the food industry were in many cases not made explicit to viewers, the analysis found. Federal Trade Commission advises all social media influencers to be clear about who is paying them for promotions. The strategy of enlisting dietitians on social media has allowed the industry to extend its vast reach and promote often questionable nutrition advice. New generations of teenage and Gen Z eaters and millennial parents accustomed to finding news and health advice on social media. By paying registered dietitians, health professionals who specialize in nutrition, the food industry is moving beyond the world of ordinary online influencers, harness the prestige of credentialed experts to deliver commercial messages. And like, yeah, in going back to this study, like TikTok and ADHD, what they found is like, you know, people, basically the non-medical professionals, you know, I guess not much surprise, they were not sharing good quality information. If anything, they were misinforming, as opposed to As they say here, healthcare providers uploaded higher quality and more useful videos compared to non-healthcare providers. What happens when we get to the point of healthcare providers paid off? Arguably, registered dietitians are healthcare providers. It's a little bit concerning, a lot concerning. They're being paid off when it comes to this aspect. And one of I think sad parts, TikTok or social media, the higher quality stuff basically doesn't get much traction. Where I think that was one of the explicit findings of this study, where the non-healthcare professionals, they were basically providing poor quality information. They were the ones that were getting the most traction. Pretty much the opposite was true for the healthcare providers, where it's like, they had higher quality and more useful videos, accurate information, but much less traction. That state of affairs. They're getting these dietitians to essentially do their marketing for them, said Marlene Schwartz, the director of the University of Connecticut's Rudd Center for Food Policy and Health. American Beverage said the dietitians who participated in its campaign adequately disclosed their relationships to the trade association by flagging the posts as paid partnerships or listing the number, the hashtag safety of aspartame hashtag, or the safetyofaspartame.com website, which includes the American Beverage logo at the bottom of the page. Out of 35 videos, 11 specifically named the association or AmeriBev as the partner at the time the videos were first posted, according to the beverage group. A spokesman said the campaign was warranted because the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and other health authorities have said aspartame is safe and disagreed with the WHO's warnings. The registered dietitians and nutritionists we relied on shared their own informed opinions when communicating the facts to their audiences and were upfront about being paid, said William Dermody, American Beverage spokesman. Grasso declined to comment. Barb Street and Phipps didn't respond to phone calls, emails, and a letter. After inquiries from the Post and the examination, Barb Street's Instagram posts were changed to include paid partnership with AmeriBev. In comments on several of the posts, viewers expressed confusion about who sponsored the videos and whether the dietitians were being paid to defend aspartame. In the video that Phipps posted on her Instagram account, Milk and Honey Nutrition, she included the phrases paid partnership, hashtag ad, and hashtag safety of aspartame. When a viewer posted a comment on the video asking Phipps who her paid partner was, Phipps acknowledged it was American Beverage and said any suggestion that I would compromise my professional ethics for money is insulting. I would say that is what you are explicitly doing, but that's... Another commenter replied, "You're insulted, but I am disillusioned." Most of the 78,000 dietitians and nutritionists in the United States aren't social media influencers. Many work in hospitals, departments of health, and private practices, and their median annual salary is $66,450 according to 2022 data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. While the dietitian influencers contacted for this article wouldn't say how much they are paid for sponsored posts, several said that companies generally pay a few $1,000s per video, and that offers could be as high as tens of thousands of dollars for creators with the biggest social media audiences. Registered dietitian Lindsay Plescott of Vancouver, British Columbia, has posted videos of herself eating ice cream and peanut butter cups while telling people that denying themselves sugary food will only make cravings worse. These and other posts were paid for by the Canadian Sugar Institute. The trade group, which is funded by sugar producers, includes the videos on its Instagram page. In one video, Plescott held a glazed donut and chocolate chip cookie, and she mocked advice to reduce sugar intake. That the best ways to cut sugar are with a knife, with my hands, even with my teeth. Pretty disturbing. In the description next to the video, she wrote, "Dietitian approved." Later in the post, it said AD to indicate it was a paid advertisement. AD ad. After inquiries about the partnership, the posts were updated with Canadian Sugar Nutrition, which is the Instagram account for the Canadian Sugar Institute. In an email, Plescott said that she initially had concerns about working with the sugar group, but that she has full control over her posts, which reflect her belief in removing guilt and shame around. She wrote that all collaborative content has been the same messaging I have shared organically for my integrity is important to me. Another dietitian with a large social media following, Jen Messina of North Vancouver, posted a video on Instagram where she added a lollipop to a dinner plate. She told parents the strategy will prevent sweets obsession and help kids develop healthy relationships with food. In another Instagram video, she told parents they can make Halloween less stressful by allowing kids to eat as much candy as they want when they're done trick-or-treating. This helps decrease the stash and makes it less of a big deal, she wrote in the text alongside the video. Yes, they may barf. That's a great life lesson. I don't know about that. I wonder if there's any of the claims they're making are research backed. I suggest not. Messina also is paid by the Canadian Sugar Institute, which she disclosed on her posts and in an interview. Messina said that while her advice is non-traditional, her goal is to help parents. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has said that too much added sugar can contribute to obesity, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. Messina declined to say how much sugar the Institute pays her for sponsored videos. Instead, she pitches ideas for videos to the Institute that has full say on what she posts. I don't work with any industries that tell me what to say or how to say it. It has to be 100% my voice or I won't do it. Since last year, the Sugar Group has paid at least a dozen registered dietitians to post videos about sugar on Instagram. Yeah, Kitty, exactly. And, you know, I'm concerned it's only going to get worse with Instagram or with whatever, social media and influencers and TikTok. Yeah, exactly. You know, it's that Simpsons episode where, yeah, I think when Bart, takes up smoking and Homer just gets him to like, well, I think he plants him in front of a smoking billboard and like has him like smoke every single cigarette in Carter cigarettes. Yeah, the greatest life lesson. But yeah, sad state of affairs. If your kiddo is obsessed with sweets, they likely need more access to a sweet rather than less, Messina wrote in one sponsored Instagram post. The Canadian Sugar Institute said that dietitians often come to the group for help expanding their reach, that the Institute does not tell them what to say. As with any dietitian activity, social media posts are based on each dietitian's authentic interests, experience, and independent evaluation of the evidence, said Chiara D'Angelo, a registered dietitian and director of nutrition communications for the Sugar Institute. So you have, I don't know. Like, yeah, you have a registered dietitian working for the Sugar Institute. The analysis by the Post and the examination also found that dietitians have been paid to tout the benefits of dietary supplements that lack scientific consensus, including products like collagen supplements promoted for skin, nail and joint health, and detox teas that claim to help the body expel toxins, and capsules marketed for mitochondria health. And, you know, I don't know for sure. I don't know what goes into the training of becoming a registered dietitian. I don't know what's in the curriculum, but I imagine they don't get the most scientific education, but I could be totally wrong. 100%. But what better way teach kids about hot surfaces? And yeah, touch all the stoves, touch all the ovens. Cynthia Scott on Augusta, an Augusta, Georgia area dietitian who has more than 300,000 followers on Instagram, urges parents to give what she calls brain-boosting omega-3 fatty acid supplements to children as young as 6 months old. In the text adjacent to her post, Scott wrote, "Paid partnership with Carlson Labs." Carlson Labs is an Illinois-based supplement company. I was literally just talking about this with someone. And like, yeah, omega-3 fatty acid supplementation. Get it. Where, yeah, this. I read this article, you know, just like a couple weeks ago, where fish oil labels make health claims despite a lack of data. Where, you know, many people, and I guess now many influencers are, you know, touting omega-3 or, yeah, fish oil supplementation. And, you know, Doesn't seem, at least so far, the evidence doesn't point to any real benefit. I don't know for sure, but I don't think there's been many trials looking at omega-3 fatty acid supplements in children 6 months of age. That seemed pretty, and I honestly don't know how any dietitian conscience do that. I mean, sure, at the end of the day, not a medical professional, but it's unlikely that, yeah, administering omega-3 fatty acids to a young child is going to have any real super negative effect, or probably no effect whatsoever, but still, doesn't change the fact. Bad advice. The American Academy of Pediatrics warns that such supplements are not approved by the FDA. Their contents may not match what is listed on the label, the Academy says. Adverse events are not always reported either. Right, and that's also another thing with supplementation that I've touched upon, where what you think is in the bottle may not actually be in the bottle, or it actually might be something totally different, something even not approved. Schwartz, the University of Connecticut nutrition expert, said she found it particularly egregious that a dietitian would try to convince parents to give their children unproven supplements. It's just so incredibly unfair to parents who are trying to get clear information. Carlson said the dietitians its sponsors make their own assessments before giving endorsements. Carlson is committed to partnering with knowledgeable and respected professionals in relevant fields who use their expertise ethically and transparently. That's questionable and clearly not true. The company said in a statement, Scott did not respond to emails, phone calls, and a letter. Regulators have struggled to keep up with the rapid rise of the online influence industry, experts say. The Federal Trade Commission instructs influencers who are paid to create sponsored messages to say clearly in both their videos and in the text of their posts that they have a financial relationship with the brand they're promoting. Few of the dietitians in the analysis said in their actual videos that their posts were advertisements. Instead, in the text accompanying their videos, they use terms like #ad, #sponsored, or paid partnership. Michael Ostomer, an attorney for the FTC's Division of Advertising Practices, said a key test is whether the sponsorship would surprise consumers and affect their opinion of the message's credibility, what the agency refers to as an unexpected material connection. Of the 33 dietitians who posted paid content to their millions of followers, about half did not clearly disclose their sponsorships in at least one of their posts. Another 2 placed disclosures deep in the descriptions. American Beverages campaign with dietitians is a case that would require clear disclosure, according to Bonnie Patton, executive director of Truth in Advertising, a nonprofit group that combats deceptive marketing. Would you expect that a dietitian would be partnering with the soda industry? Patton asked. Those are the most important kinds of disclosures that we need. In 2020, the FTC sent 10 warning letters to influencers, including rapper Cardi B, for not disclosing paid social media ads for a tea marketer. The company agreed to pay $1 million to settle charges that it misled consumers and didn't adequately disclose paid social media influence. But aside from periodic sweeps against deceptive conduct, the Commission does not have the resources to comprehensively enforce behavior within a continuously expanding online marketplace, said David Vladeck, former head of the Commission's Bureau of Consumer Protection and now a Georgetown University law professor. When you don't have sufficient enforcement, companies think they can get away with it, Vladeck said. No one on either side of the table thinks the FTC has the resources to really police this marketplace. That's bad for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the trade group that oversees registered dietitians, has a code of ethics that says that dietitians should disclose conflicts of interest and avoid accepting gifts or services which potentially influence or which may give the appearance of influencing professional judgment. Lori Wright, the Academy's president, said the group educates its members so that dietitians know what that line is and how not to cross that line. The Academy has a board of ethics that reviews allegations that dietitians have violated its ethical code and can impose penalties, revoking a dietitian's license, if it finds that a violation took place. So far, the board has not received any complaints about social media activities, Wright said. The food and beverage industry has for years nurtured a close relationship with the Academy, which has accepted millions of dollars in donations from leading producers of soda, candy, and ultra-processed foods, including Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Nestle. Academy has allowed these companies to provide continuing education courses to its dietitians and has invested in food industry stocks. Two of the Academy's sponsors are American Beverage and Tate & Lyle, one of the world's largest producers of high fructose corn syrup and other sweeteners. Some dietitians have questioned the relationship between the Academy and food and beverage companies in response to a 2013 report that investigated the Academy's industry ties. More than a dozen registered dietitians formed Dietitians for Professional Integrity, a group that advocated against what members saw as compromising financial ties to the food industry. Although the group raised these concerns from dietitians directly with the Academy, an early petition garnered over 24,000 signatures that the group disbanded in 2018. Fundamentally, I think it really fell on deaf ears throughout the time that we were advocating for this cause with the Academy, said one of the group's co-founders, Elizabeth Lee, a registered dietitian and health educator at Stanford Medicine. Wright, the president of the Nutrition Academy, said in an email that its leaders communicated often with dietitians for professional integrity when the group was still active, that the Academy has a stringent process for reviewing, approving, and rejecting potential corporate sponsors. He said that sponsorships represent less than 7% of the Academy's revenue, and that sponsors do not influence the Academy's positions. In the vetting system for sponsors, the Academy looks at the mix of products a company sells, Wright said. The beverage industry sells so much more than just soda. Dietitians who boast large social media followings said that brands are eager to recruit them, flooding them with offers to pitch products. Among the most popular is Grasso, with a combined following of 2.4 million on TikTok and Instagram. Her videos dances and lip syncs to pop music while preparing recipes or dresses in different outfits, such as red for blood sugar or blue for insulin, to explain nutrition concepts. Her goal, Grasso writes on her website, is to use her expertise and comedy to provide evidence-based nutrition advice and debunk trending nutrition myths. That's questionable, but I don't know them as an influencer. Grasso has paralyzed her popularity into endorsement deals with numerous food and dietary supplement companies. In recent months, she has posted sponsored TikTok and Instagram videos for brands including Barilla Pasta, Bush's Beans, Fine Snacks, Oregon Collagen Powders, collagen basically useless, Into Water flavored beverages, and Treetop applesauce. In these ads, Grasso flagged the posts as paid partnerships and tagged the brands in her caption. Shanna Manai Spence, a dietitian with more than 265,000 followers on Instagram, eats pizza, french fries, and ice cream in her social media videos to illustrate that no foods should be stigmatized. Spence, who works for the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, describes herself as pro-processed foods. I guess nuance there. Which, I do have some research showing that you can create, a healthy diet with ultra-processed foods. Spence said she partners with companies that share her values and turns down about 90% of sponsorship offers she receives. I work in marginalized and food-insecure neighborhoods, which is why I am passionate about destigmatizing processed foods, she wrote in an email. Spence said she has been paid by the Japanese multinational food company Ajinomoto for video debunking concerns about the flavor enhancer MSG. Spence didn't say in the video that the message was sponsored. The caption says, #AjiPartner. A spokesperson for Ajinomoto said that dietitians were essential to its campaign because of their ability to communicate science credibly. Spence has also posted on TikTok for a Dave's Killer Bread snack bar. Just keep them at your desk, she said. In the caption, she wrote #ad, the brand name, and tagged the post as a paid partnership. Dave's Killer Bread did not respond to questions. In April 2022, PepsiCo paid Spence to teach a webinar to other dietitians titled Unpackaging Preconceptions About Packaged Foods. She said, registered dietitians who participated received continuing education credits. In the webinar, Spence disputed health concerns about processed foods. What we have to do as dietitians, as health professionals, is really debunk some of this information, she told her listeners. I don't disagree. And I guess it depends, on a case-by-case basis on which processed food. Like, is there evidence to back up their claims? In an interview, Spence said PepsiCo had no role in shaping her presentation. He declined to say how much the company paid her for the event. PepsiCo didn't respond to a request for comment. But, I think fundamentally, even if they're giving accurate information, at least in my opinion. I think it shows a lack of integrity. Personally, that's just my Monica D'Agostino, a New York dietitian with more than 740,000 followers on TikTok, said in one video that she gets a barrage of offers, pitch greens, powders, dietary supplements that are widely promoted with unproven claims and haven't been well studied. In her video, D'Agostino said she would never blindly promote the powders because the blends of ingredients aren't always clear. She jokingly lamented her professional ethics because there is a check behind those powders. D'Agostino, who didn't respond to requests for comment, said in the video that if she took the money she was offered to promote the supplements, she could afford to buy 8 1,450 designer Saint Laurent handbags and give $549 Apple AirPod Maxes to 20 of her friends. I could be like Oprah with my friends, one for you, one for you, one for you, D'Agostino said. This is just me showing you there is money behind those green powders that are being marketed to you. Yeah, so pretty concerning. And I think something like, yeah, I think this is just going to become more and more common, where, actual health or medical professionals make unsubstantiated claims on social media. But I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping this is an outlier, but it's pretty concerning that registered dietitians are actually willing to do that. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover on this. I'm gonna save this probably for tomorrow, along with the MDMA research. Decided to read and to cover. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Basically, replication of this study, if not maybe even better. The fact that, including both moderate and severe. So, anybody to raid? Oh, Astro Canuck is gonna raid into them. Gonna set that up. But yeah, with that, I want to thank everyone that passed by and asked great questions. Kitty, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for passing by. Lesbian Hot Sauce. And also, yeah, shouted them out here. But yeah, fellow streamer. Lesbian Hot Sauce. We're going to be having a discussion about long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome on October 8th, if I remember correctly. I'm going to post pretty much the date and details in the Discord, but pretty much a little over a week from now. I'm excited about that. Oh, and thank you, Kitty, for passing by. And thank you, Discount Seth Rogen, for passing by. Always super appreciated. And always appreciate the jokes and the commentary. And thank you, Bob Marley, and Doffy, and Pog Farm, and anybody else that I forgot. I apologize. I plan to be back tomorrow. Again, hoping my sleep still holds. Hoping I'm on the road to good quality sleep. I think cutting out the caffeine was a step in the right, and it seems to be working. Hoping it continues to work, and if so, I should be back tomorrow, and I'll be posting the Discord when I go live. But that is my plan to pretty much, as I put in my schedule, stream tomorrow, Saturday, and yeah, if anyone wants to join the Discord, updates, and to post research or ask questions, free. Bunch of great resources and great people. So we're gonna raid into Astro Canuck because they're Canadian, because they cover science and tech, but right now they're doing some arts and crafts, building Legos. But they also do astrophotography. So, and they also have, again, I can't stress it enough, one of the, in my opinion, like the best stream setup then most interactive stream setup. So if you're not following them, you should be. And again, thank you everyone. Super grateful. I plan to be back tomorrow. And until next time, care, be well, kind, and again, if you're not following Astro Canuck, you absolutely should.
Glasses. Those who do have the 3D glasses.
Go and throttle up.
Yeah.